might expect some of them, but not all, and not all the time. My mother-in-law was mistaken to think she could avoid trouble just by worrying. It arrives unexpectedly, like a thief in the night whenever it chooses, and you can't predict it. This story begins on a Saturday night. Alice and I had come home early, feeling energetic and ready for a special evening together. In bed, I turned to Alice and shared a kiss, feeling close to her. We enjoyed each other's company, and I loved her warmth and softness. "Oh," she said, "do you have something planned?" "Maybe I do and maybe I don't." "Let's find out. Light the candle while I get something." I dimmed the lamps and lit a fragrant candle shaped like a star. It smelled like sandalwood. As I admired it, I felt content. I changed into something more comfortable, while Alice got a washcloth from the bathroom. She returned and knelt beside me, helping me get ready. You feel nice," she whispered. We enjoyed each other's presence, sharing affection. After a little while, she lay back and suggested I join her. It was a moment of connection that felt special. The next night was New Year's Eve, the night before everything changed. We were excited about the celebrations in Las Vegas with our friends Bill and Jessica. We planned to let loose and have fun, remembering the good times from years past. I didn't know what was to come, but neither did Alice. Then, a dark storm entered our lives, Richard. "Richard, why are you here?" I thought, feeling the tension rise. I know we were content before he arrived. I was happy, or at least I felt settled. Alice was my wife, and I loved her. But sometimes, some of us always seek something more, something beyond the ordinary. That's all I meant. We enjoyed spending time together and had a nice home and yard that we both worked hard on. People often commented on them. The local newspaper even featured our yard in a Sunday photo shoot a few years ago. As for our intimacy, it was different after being married for over a decade. It was much calmer than it had been years ago. There were some things we used to enjoy that we stopped talking about. But it wasn't bad, just quieter. Sometimes I looked at adult content online, but I wasn't seeking out other women. I didn't think Alice was unhappy or looking for other men. Why did we have to go to the New Year's party? I like parties, socializing, and having a few drinks. Alice, on the other hand, hasn't enjoyed them as much. I often made excuses for her not to go. She could have stayed home and enjoyed watching the New Year's celebrations on TV, which she loved. I guess she thought I would be upset if she stayed home again, or maybe it was to see our friends. I'm not sure why events turn out the way they do. Isn't it interesting how events play out? Things have to align just right. Sometimes small choices lead to big changes. If only we hadn't run into Richard. If that hadn't happened, other things might not have occurred either. We certainly didn't seek him out. He hadn't been a close friend for a while since his career changed direction. He moved from being a lawyer to something quite different. He once told me about a film he made that won an award, and I remembered reading about it. It was quite different from what he used to do. He invited me to watch it, and while I had to admit it was well made, Alice walked out during one scene because it made her uncomfortable. So maybe it isn't just adult content, but something bordering on it. It makes you wonder what one considers acceptable or not. His situation might be serious enough to handle the new government rules. Along with a movie, Richard sent us a card that offered free tickets for a cruise to his resort island in the Caribbean, an island known for romance. Why? Because he used to be my close friend. Or maybe he just wanted to show off. I told him thanks, but I couldn't go because of my wife. He has clubs, websites, and a legal business in the Nevada desert. I never got a free trip there. He gives personal advice and different services. This all started from an idea he had about where the money was and what he wanted to do. We stopped seeing him when he left his wife, who had been very supportive of him. At least, that is what she hinted to Alice. She probably would have stayed with him forever if she could have, but at least he made sure she was taken care of. You can see where this is going. The old story of my best friend and my wife. But it's more complicated than it seems. He hasn't been my best friend for a long time, not since he began spending time with different people and acting differently. And then there's Alice. Was it him or her, or me? It's confusing. So there we were on the dance floor with faint smells in the air, the music loud, drowning out the sounds from the slot machines. I would have left, but not Alice. If we hadn't been stuck there, I might have gone. We could hardly talk over the noise. It was all too loud for me. I stuffed tissue in my ears and Bill handed me something to help, and soon it became more bearable. Then Richard showed up, appearing just as one song ended, looking sharp in black as if from a different time. It didn't fit the vibe of Vegas, but might have worked in a classic movie. His hair was slicked back like a character from a film. I wondered if that was the style in his world. It all seemed so odd, but given how many people were around him, I guess it worked. I hadn't seen him in ages, but he looked the same, always in dark clothes, always with someone new by his side. The new person with him was a blonde, of course, slim and stylish. She had a look about her that was very noticeable. Richard dressed her in something reminiscent of the dancers from years ago, but with a skirt instead of shorts. The skirt was so short that it showed a lot of her legs. If she leaned over, you could see more than was appropriate. When she did lean, it was clear she had chosen to keep things tidy. We hadn't talked yet. He was in a small room for smoking and chatting, while others were stuck in the bigger ballroom. I wasn't sure if he noticed us. He dropped something on the floor and she bent down to pick it up. In that moment, she caught everyone's attention. Even those of us outside could see her through the doors. Alice noticed immediately and elbowed me, saying, "Look who's here with his new friend." Jessica laughed nervously. When I looked up, Richard was staring right at us, but not at me. He was looking at Alice. The others missed his look because they were too busy watching the girl. I should have sensed something was off. Things got complicated quickly after that. Richard walked into the ballroom, bringing the girl with him. She seemed to be following him closely. When I looked again, I noticed she was wearing a collar with a leash attached. Richard held the leash, and she walked a couple of steps behind him as he approached us. The crowd spread out for him, curious to see what would happen next. Even the women seemed captivated. Richard kept a proud expression while the girl looked down, avoiding eye contact. I shouldn't have said anything. I realized that, but he seemed so cocky. The sounds of the machines and the buzz of excitement mixed together in a way that made me feel bold. So I blurted out, "Hi, Richard. Where did you find your friend?" "Henry!" he called out loudly, "and the always charming Alice. Let me introduce Diane. Diane, say hello." He put extra emphasis on always. Diane looked up, but only her eyes moved. She seemed nervous, despite all the makeup. "Hello," she said in a soft voice like someone from a small town. It made me wonder how Richard convinced her to play this role. "I'm showing Diane the ropes," he said loudly. He seemed to ignore everyone else but Alice and me, fully aware of the attention they were drawing. Alice decided to respond, taking the chance to play along. "I bet you are, and teaching her some tricks too." "Isn't she a bit young?" She had a look that seemed to say she didn't care what anyone thought. Jessica nervously laughed again. "Oh, I'm just helping out. I'd much rather have someone more mature like you." He glanced at Alice, making sure everyone noticed his interest. "If Henry wanted to trade, I'd take you right away." "Just like that." He then looked at me. "What do you say, Henry? Sweet Diane is just the type to bring some excitement to someone who hasn't had much variety lately." How could I respond? I started to say something, but he turned back to Alice, who looked surprised. "And you, lovely Alice, I would do everything for you. I'd make you feel special and take my time because you deserve that." Her eyes got wider. "Anyone who does less doesn't deserve you." No one knew how to react, not even Bill. Silence hung in the air as we stood there, surrounded by the sounds of the slot machines. Jessica seemed like she wanted to disappear, but she couldn't stop looking at Richard. He could have kept talking for ages, but then the music started again. The house lights dimmed, leaving just the twinkling lights above, and loud music filled the room. Richard stepped up to Alice and shouted so everyone could hear. "Would you like to dance, beautiful?" Alice stepped back quickly, nearly stumbling as she bumped into someone behind her. "No." She paused, trying to think of a good response. "No, thank you. You have a date. It's fine. Henry can take Diane, he'll enjoy that, and I'll enjoy dancing with you." No. Maybe another time." He pulled Diane onto the dance floor just as the flashing lights began. I couldn't really tell if there was a tune or a singer. The music felt like a loud noise with a steady beat. I don't have a clear memory of it. I tried to cover my ears, but then would pull my hands down so I wouldn't look silly. The dance floor was crowded, with some people in the bright lights and others in the shadows. The music pounded all around us. Neither Alice nor I moved. Right in front of us, Richard was dancing with Diane. He wasn't moving much, just a little shuffling as he held the leash while Diane twirled around him. Their movements were quick and jerky in the strobe lights. Her skirt was short, and it almost revealed more than it should have when she spun. More and more people watched them, and Richard seemed to enjoy being the center of attention, as he always did. In the flashing lights and pulsing music of the club, people on the floor and at tables turned their heads. Some pointed, some stared. Alice, close to me, seemed to shout something, but it was impossible to hear her in the noise. The room went dark for a moment, and when the lights came back, Alice gripped my arm, yelling, "Look!" I turned to see Richard on the dance floor, moving in the bursts of strobe lights. His demeanor had changed. Diane, who was beside him, looked tense as he held a leash, positioning her with unsettling authority. He faced us, ignoring the crowd and music, as if issuing some silent challenge. The energy between them, and the way Richard kept his focus on Alice, was unnerving. Alice tugged at my arm, shouting over the noise, clearly distressed. People nearby began to notice, some pulling away while others watched closely, a mixture of shock and intrigue on their faces. Richard seemed aware of every eye on him, yet he maintained his intense stare toward Alice. The crowd shifted and murmured, forming a loose circle around Richard and Diane as the music pounded on. Alice was watching quietly now, no longer shouting or pulling at me, just watching. Then the music stopped, and everything felt muffled. The soft lights came back on. I looked at Alice, but by the time I turned back, Richard and Diane were lost in the crowd. I could see him moving toward the gambling area. The mood of the evening changed. Alice kept saying things like, "That creep" and "that jerk," muttering to herself while others chatted. It didn't help when someone tried to joke about it. "None of you tried to stop him," she shouted, frustrated. "Why didn't security do something?" This was Las Vegas, after all. Sometimes things go wrong, especially where money is involved, but Alice didn't want to hear it. Bill had Jessica close. He jokingly said he would scold her when they got home. She leaned into him, saying she'd behave. She seemed shy and nervous, so I wondered if he really would. The shock began to fade after a while. I thought it was over. He had done his thing and we could move on. We stayed at the casino until the new year arrived, and we were all feeling good by then. During a slow dance with Alice, I noticed a change in her. She began to press against me in a way that felt different. We kissed, and I felt a reaction. "You're my naughty boy," she whispered to me. "And you're my naughty girl," I replied. About 2 a.m, we stepped outside and walked down the strip to see the fountains. It was just as crowded and dark enough that I could slip my hand under her skirt without anyone noticing. I hadn't done that in a long time, but she didn't stop me. I remembered a quick glimpse of Richard and Diane, and I moved my hand until I felt softness. Then I explored further. As the fountains danced to old music, she leaned against me, pretending to watch. Suddenly she pointed toward some bushes where a man was leaning and a woman was nearby. She leaned closer to my ear and asked, "Would you like me to do that?" "Yeah. Right now." I knew it wouldn't happen. It never had. Some women may do it during intimate moments or as something special, but most are not comfortable with it, despite what movies might show. Some might get brave just once and feel proud about it. I'm not arguing with that. But Alice had never crossed that line with me. Alice and I were growing closer lately, almost like we'd rekindled something between us. We enjoyed each other's company in a way that felt new, even if life continued as usual. Then, a few days after New Year's, something shifted. I noticed it right away when I came home from work. Alice was different somehow, quieter, as if something weighed on her mind. "Hi, honey, I'm home," I called out, but she barely looked up from chopping vegetables. I leaned in to give her a quick kiss, but she didn't respond much. "Everything okay?" I asked. She sighed, not meeting my gaze. "I'm just tired, Henry. Dinner will be ready in about half an hour. Why don't you go watch the news?" She avoided eye contact, and her voice sounded distant. I could tell something was wrong, but she wasn't about to say what it was. Dinner was unusually quiet. Alice left the table before the news ended, her mood still cold and distant. I was confused. It didn't feel like we'd had a fight, but something was clearly off. Later, while I was clearing the dishes, Alice surprised me by wrapping her arms around me in a sudden hug, holding on tightly. I felt relief wash over me. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I'm really just tired. Let's go to bed early tonight, okay? In bed, things felt warmer between us. She came over to me, a spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a while, and she held my hand as we made our way back to the bedroom. The way she reached out to me made it feel like we were rediscovering each other all over again. I gently traced my hand along Alice's leg, giving her chills with each touch. Her skin was soft and warm. I could feel how close we were, and I leaned in, enjoying the moment. She was holding me, her gaze warm and steady, showing she was fully there with me. Afterward, I felt a wave of relief, as if any worries between us had faded. The next evening, when Alice came home late, she seemed genuinely happy. I was making dinner, and she walked over, wrapped her arms around me, and said, "I love you, Henry." Throughout the night, she'd give me little hugs and kisses, and each time she'd whisper, "I love you." Later, as she got ready for bed, I came over, playfully wrapped my arms around her, and she laughed. "Do you have something planned?" "I know just how to make you smile," I replied, and we shared a light-hearted moment, both of us laughing together. When I went to the bedroom, I set a candle on the nightstand, watching its gentle flicker dance across the room, filling the space with warmth. Alice joined me, wearing a soft robe I'd given her years ago, something she usually kept tucked away. We shared a smile, feeling completely at ease, and just enjoyed each other's company. The warmth in the room mirrored the comfort we felt with one another, as if nothing else mattered. "Have you lost it?" She started to take off her clothes. "I want some more of what I enjoyed last night." "Oh, well, we might have some more." Indeed we did. She experienced pleasure again. It was similar to the previous night, and I watched her get more excited until she reached her peak, but when it was done, she didn't ask for more. "Let me take care of you, honey." I lay down, and she began to touch me. She sprinkled some powder, making everything feel ticklish, which was almost too much for me. I wanted to hold her, but she knelt so I couldn't. She continued for a good while. Then I felt very close. "I'm getting close." She paused. "Just trust me." So I relaxed, and she continued until I reached the end. She cleaned me up with a warm, wet cloth. We loved each other a third night in a row. But the next afternoon, she seemed distant and moody. It felt like the first day all over again. "What's wrong? I'm just tired," she said. I thought it would pass like before, but that night was different. She hardly spoke, and I could barely get a kiss before bed. The next night, she came into the room while I was watching TV, helped me, and started to be intimate. She said little, "Just get your pants down." I was surprised by her actions. Then she stayed with me until I finished, holding me close. I felt confused but also happy. What had changed? Then things took an unexpected turn. When she was done, she wouldn't let me return the favor or do anything else. She stood up and left me there. She didn't respond when I tried to connect with her later. I felt like I was back in the doghouse. Before long, it became clear she was permanently distant. By permanently, I mean a few days until she decided to leave. There was little conversation and no intimacy, as she spent her time reading or using her computer. She was often gone, working late at the office and needing to shop alone on the weekends. I tried to keep myself busy so I wouldn't think about why things felt so off between us. After our intimate moments, she seemed distant, and I couldn't figure it out. I felt confused. I wished that was the worst of it, but it only got tougher from there. On Monday, when I got home, Alice wasn't there. The house felt empty without her. Her car was gone, and I knew something was wrong. This was unusual for Alice. I thought maybe she had just gone out for groceries, but she hadn't left a note or any messages. I wandered through the house, checking every room. Everything seemed normal, but Alice was missing. I called her phone and it went to voicemail. "Alice, where are you? Please come home." I tried calling her office, but it was already closed. By 7 o'clock, there was still no sign of Alice. I stared out the window, paced back and forth, and looked for a note again. I checked the phone to ensure it was working and considered calling the police. What if something had happened? I felt a knot in my stomach, and a strange, uneasy feeling took over. I almost wished there had been an accident. "Alice, where are you? Could she have left me? Had I really messed things up so badly without noticing? I thought maybe I should call her sister Deb, but how would I explain it? "Hi, Deb. I can't find Alice. Do you know where she is? What else could I do? I felt I needed to reach out to someone. Then I remembered if she had left, she would have taken a bag. I rushed to check the bedroom closet. Sure enough, a suitcase was missing, and it struck me that Alice was truly gone. It was time to call Deb, or maybe Jessica. What was happening? Was our last moment together something she intended to lessen the burden about leaving? Suddenly, the phone rang. Alice? I answered hopefully. Hello, Henry! It was Richard's loud voice echoing through the line. I can't talk, Richard. I'm waiting for a call. Yes, of course, from Alice. She's right here. I didn't reply. I felt lost. Could Alice really be with Richard? How could that happen? Confused, I pressed the phone to my ear, staring blankly at a picture nearby, trying to grasp some sense of the situation. Finally, I managed to say, Put her on. In a moment, Henry. Just a moment. She'll find it hard to talk to you, so I said I would speak with you first. Alice is here with me. She's staying with me now. She's my partner. You will have to move on. His voice was as warm and cheerful as ever. What is happening? Put my wife on the phone now. Of course, Henry, but please try to stay calm. This is hard for her, and she just wants to find some happiness in her tough life. There was a crackling sound as he passed the phone to Alice. Henry, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell you, but I had to leave. I felt trapped. I couldn't take it anymore. What do you mean? What's going on? I don't understand, Alice. I love you. Please, come home so we can talk. No, I am not coming back. I needed to start fresh. Please stay away. The line went silent. Short, clear sentences came to mind like steps fading away. But there was no clear reason. She was sad. She wanted out. Why now? There had been some distance lately. Just a week ago, she loved me. What changed? What caused the sadness? Richard's phone numbers are private. I tried calling everyone I knew, but no one picked up, so I left messages everywhere. Richard, I need to talk to Alice. Have her call me or come by or anything. Richard, please, we must talk. I need to understand. I called Deb. Henry, she replied sharply. I don't know what's happening with you two. She told me she was making a change. Let me finish. It was just today, this morning. What did you do? What did I do? I tried Jessica next. Bill answered. What did you do, Henry? I can't believe Alice would just leave like that. Some women, sure, but not her. Jessica hadn't heard anything either. You would reach out to everyone you could think of if she belonged to you. If it was the only thing you could do at night. Calling people who were nearly strangers to tell them you lost your wife. Did they know anything? Had they heard anything? Our whole circle found out soon. She left with him? He's that well known. Yes, she did. At least none of them asked what I had done to make this happen. I struggled to remember things clearly from that night and the next few days. I was too frantic to think straight. Around midnight, it struck me to drive to Richard's place. It's a private community, surrounded by tall trees that thrive in the dry land. I had the guard at the gate call the house. He spoke briefly, looking at me every so often as if I might cause trouble. I'm sorry, sir. He's staying at a different place tonight. The staff doesn't know when he will be back. I asked the logical question and got the answer I expected. No, sir. We can't share his location. What was he doing with Alice while I was here, lost in confusion? He had her completely to himself, didn't he? I fell asleep on the couch, waiting for a call that never came. I drove to Richard's office building at dawn when everything was quiet, and I waited in my car until people started to arrive. At 9, I called Alice's office and spoke to her assistant. Another shock. She had quit last week. She hadn't even given them a proper notice. So she was changing everything in her life, cutting out everyone, especially me. I couldn't have done anything that bad. She could have moved in with Deb, found a place, or sought help. It was all because of him, just him. That jerk. A dark limousine pulled into Richard's parking space, and I jumped out of my car and ran toward it without even closing my door. I didn't need to hurry. The passenger window rolled down and I was facing some lawyer. Where is he? I need to see him. As you can see, Mr. Moriarty is not here. Also, you are not welcome on these premises. If you don't leave right away, we will have to ask you to go. But he has my wife. He took her from me. That is a matter between you and your spouse, not Mr. Moriarty. I looked around and saw 2 very large but polite young men ready to escort me away. A private investigator I once spoke to told me that people leave traces and can always be found. Richard hardly even tried. He had the money to go off the grid. With a bit of work, my PI found 2 other places he was staying, a few more phone numbers, and a couple of work addresses. I drove to the first address, another gated property. The same 2 men were waiting for me there. They followed me to find the next place, then to Richard's other work address, where 2 more men were waiting. I went home and started calling all his numbers, leaving messages everywhere. I called his offices repeatedly. His secretaries began to ignore my calls. Stupid caller ID. At 2 p.m. I called and canceled all my appointments for the week. I drove to a spot a few blocks from one of Richard's places, parked, and tried to find a way in. But within 5 minutes, the same 2 large men came out to greet me. This time, they forcefully led me back to my car. "Listen, you need to stay away from Mr. Moriarty or you might regret it." Not quite as polite this time. I finally saw Richard when he came to meet me a few days later. I was sitting in the living room, staring at a wall, feeling lost without Alice, my wife, my partner. She was gone, out of nowhere, and with him. I jumped when the doorbell rang. There he was, accompanied by the 2 bodyguards, one standing between us. "Henry!" His voice was the same, warm and familiar. "I hear you've been looking for me. Where is Alice?" "She's fine, Henry." "Where is she? You took her. I need to speak with her." "She left you. It happens. Accept it, Henry. Move on. Find someone else." "What do you mean? What have you done with her?" I felt a surge of anger. It was in that moment that my hatred for him peaked. "Oh, you don't really want to know, Henry. I've had some interesting times with her. I might say we shared some fun moments. Things you never did?" I glared at him. Could I land a good punch before he could stop me? "What did you do? How did this happen?" Richard seemed a bit impatient. "Look, Henry, I charmed her, okay? I showed her I'm the person who can offer her what she's looking for. And it's true, I can. I encouraged her to see things differently." "How?" Henry, I can't explain everything. The truth is, many women respond well if you approach them the right way. Alice was no different. Men often think they need to be overly nice to get a woman's attention. But that's not what most women want. Some do, but not all. They often show who they are drawn to. They want a strong man, someone who is smart and successful. They look for someone confident and a bit assertive. For this man, they want to feel special. He lingered on the word special, stretching it out. They might not admit it. They think they want equality, but it's true. Once they commit to a man, they often go along with what he wants. Did you ever notice that many change their views to match his? A lot of women start doing things just to make their partner happy. It happens in many areas, not just relationships. If he takes the lead, that's often how it goes. That's why some stay with men who mistreat them. They feel they can't imagine life without him and will do anything to feel important to him. And Alice. You want to know how I got to Alice, don't you? It was easier than you think. I charmed her over the phone. By the second call, I knew I had her interest. You wouldn't believe how easy it can be with those who think they're tough and try to prove it by being rude, but you wouldn't know that, Henry. You've never had to charm someone like that. He finally revealed something useful. She never told you I called, did she? He'd called? Of course he had. Probably that first day, sometime after lunch. Things started to make sense. Finally, I spoke. And she talked to you? I can't believe it. Believe it, he laughed. She was always curious about me, but she acted like she didn't care. I thought she really didn't like you. Richard laughed again. I'm not fooled by what people show on the outside, he said. She thought she should dislike me, but in her mind, I was someone special. I could give her a lot, and I became the man she dreamed about. I'm sure after my first call, she was thinking about what it would be like to be close to me. Maybe even before that, after the New Year's party. That's how it goes, Henry. Women don't just think about fun. They enjoy it, sure, but first, they want a connection. They start imagining a relationship, and that can lead to wanting more. His beeper went off. He took it out and looked at it. I have to go, Henry. Just so you know, this call was just to let you know. You should give Alice some space. She doesn't want to talk to you, and I hope things don't get tense. But who knows? Maybe someday we can all be friends again. For now, if you need to leave a message, call this number. One of the young men handed me a business card, and they left. The next day, a CD arrived. The doorbell rang again, and I knew it was bringing more bad news. It was a courier who handed me the CD. What was I going to do with it? I went straight to a CD player and played it. It was a recording of Richard's first call to Alice, his way of bragging. It made it clear that everything he said was true. Richard had charmed Alice just like he claimed he had. I thought he was one of the most honest people I'd ever met. I still have the CD. It's stored carefully, and I saved the recording on my computer so I could listen to it whenever I wanted to feel upset. Listen. Hello? Hello, lovely Alice. This is Richard. And what brings you to call? Henry isn't home yet. That's fine. I'd rather speak to you anyway. You're much more interesting. Well, I don't find you interesting. I don't enjoy shows of cheap thrills. Thrills? The other night? Oh, Alice, do you really think I pushed Diane to do something she didn't want? I'm sure she enjoys the attention, especially in a crowd. Of course. Dear Alice, it was all part of the fun. Didn't you see how excited she got? We planned everything together so she could live out a fantasy she had. I thought you understood that. I saw it in your eyes. What drives people often comes from a place of imagination, and New Year's helped Diane feel that way. Oh, I'm sure it did. How about you? Just a usual day at the office. I shape my life around dreams. You know this. It has given me success and freedom. And people want what I offer. Maybe some women like that, Dick, but not me. What I saw on New Year's was more than just an act. Don't be so hard on yourself, dear Alice. You find me more interesting than you say. And I find you very appealing. But it was only partly a show. It was a performance. She agreed to the rules before we began, the rules of the fantasy. She had to stick to her part. If it were just an act, she wouldn't have felt so alive. She needed to know I could play my role well to make her dream seem real. If you'd like, I could ask her to explain it to you. You really think so highly of yourself? She was done with the playful talk. On the recording, Richard bursts into a genuine laugh, feeling totally at ease before he replies, well, yes, about the first part. He laughs again. But I'm not so full of myself that I think I can just walk in and everyone will find me charming. It's all much more complicated than that. Another laugh follows. Oh, you don't just create a fantasy? I thought you could do anything in a dream. She probably thought she was being clever, but he didn't skip a beat. Oh no! Good fantasies need imagination and lots of detail, but they also need careful planning. That's why most people's dreams don't go anywhere. One needs to master them, explore them, think through the steps and possibilities, and manage everything. It requires action. That's what turns a fantasy into more than just a wish inside when you're with someone. Alice stays quiet. There's a long pause in the recording. You're very quiet, Alice. Why don't you share a dream? With some thought and conversation, it can grow. Finally, she speaks, her voice softer, without the excitement it had before. I think I should go now, Richard. I'm not one of your clients. I'm a happy married woman. I'm not interested in your games. Of course not, Alice. Richard's tone shifts, softer and more serious. I never meant to suggest that. I'm sorry. I'm not that bold. But you do have dreams, ones you don't talk about. You act in predictable ways at predictable times. Perhaps those dreams come to you when you're in those moments. Maybe they inspire you even before you start. They are your own private thoughts, not even shared with Henry. A short silence follows. He doesn't let it linger. His timing is skillful on the tape. Tell me I'm wrong, Alice. Be honest. She finally responds, sounding weary. Everyone has dreams. They make life brighter. I'm definitely not going to share mine. Of course not, Alice. I apologize once more. I'm sharing what I do. I help people bring their dreams to life, and I charge them for it. I charge a lot. I tell them everyone can have more in their lives, and that's true. Later, they come back and pay me more to explore their dreams or to dream up new ones. There's always the chance for more. Imagination is what makes life enjoyable for those who think. You know yours can be more. I help people with that, and they find it valuable enough to pay me well. In this moment, she tries to lighten the mood with a laugh that sounds a bit forced. I don't know why I let you talk like this. Like I said, I'm not going to be one of your fantasy girls. He laughs genuinely this time. And yet here you are, talking to me when you could have hung up long ago. He chuckles again and adds playfully, I guess I'll just have to keep my dreams of you to myself. She laughs again, still a bit strained. Yes, I guess so. There's a pause. But I don't think I like the idea of you dreaming about me. You don't have my permission to do that. But as you mentioned, everyone has dreams. I'm just more open about mine. That's why I'm good at this. Why it's my work, because I'm not like others who might hide their feelings. Then he sounds more serious. And they're mine. I don't need approval for them. He lets a silence follow. I imagine him pausing, thinking about how long to give her. It feels like forever, but it's only about 5 seconds before she speaks up. I don't know about your dreams. Her voice sounds different now, calm, not angry or upset. I don't need your approval, Alice. She hesitates. Should I be worried about what you're feeling? He stretches out the moment again, his delivery smooth. You said you didn't want to know. Well, I don't know. Her voice is hesitant. Maybe you should tell me. I think you should share what you're thinking. Another pause. She seems uncomfortable. Because I might worry about them. Silence fills the space. Richard. A brief pause follows. So you want to know what I've imagined about you? Yes, no, I don't know. You brought it up, not me. And you're curious. I'm concerned. Okay, I'll tell you just one small thought. It's nothing big, just a little something in my mind. Hesitation. Okay. Well, he drags it out again like he's enjoying the suspense. In this thought, I see us in a different setting. Another pause. Then, oh, it's hard to tell if that's a question or just an expression of surprise, maybe even wonder. But you're secured in place, comfortable. Oh, of course, that sounds familiar. She seems relieved, thinking it's straightforward. Not at all. It's just that a woman like you might catch me off guard at just the wrong moment, and we wouldn't want that, would we? He chuckles but goes on before she can respond. But really, this is for you. This way you can't decide how it goes or how long it lasts, and you get to feel that strange mix of being unsure and enjoying it. In my imagination, I focus on making you feel good, moving slowly and carefully to build up your excitement. Alice doesn't respond. How does that sound as a little piece of a dream, Alice? Finally, she says, if the woman in your dream doesn't like it, can't she just say so? No, she can't. Why not? Because I have my own way of controlling things. If you say anything at all, you know there will be consequences, so you have to go along with it. I'm making you feel good. She takes her time to reply. I can picture her thinking about what to say. When she finally speaks, she sounds breathless. So, what do you get from this dream if you're focused on making her happy? I know my turn will come. I get to enjoy you in so many ways. I feel your warmth and see you in front of me. Did you know you close your eyes when you're excited? Alice remains silent. And I experience your taste. You have a natural scent and it feels captivating. I notice how you sound, too. I hear every breath, every little sound as you respond. You can't help but react, Alice. It draws you in. Alice suddenly interrupts. Richard, I have to go. I'm really sorry. Of course, Alice, I'd like to talk again. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm sorry. Let me reach out again in a few days. I need to hang up. Just say I can call you. I have to go. Please say it. I have to go. She sounds very anxious. Just say it. Maybe another time. Just give me a day, a time. Not before Thursday, maybe in the afternoon. I'll call you then. There's a click, and the recording ends. And that was all it took? How could he change her so easily? I listened again and could tell the moment she began to give in. At first, she resisted, but as he shared his dream, it pulled her in. You could hear the shift in her voice. She didn't want to be drawn in, but she was. It startled her how much she began to want it. Then when she tried to pull away, she ended up giving him a time to connect again. A time on Thursday afternoon when I was never around. It was so easy for him, like he barely had to try. I called the number on his card. The gift you sent has arrived, so you had fun with my wife, but you called her difficult. Did that make it more enjoyable for you? Are you going to leave her now that it's over? I want to talk to her. Right now. Another message for Richard, left in voicemail again. My words vanished into silence. He was really skilled. So incredibly skilled. How could a man who was supposed to be less than good make her change in just a few moments of conversation? He was like a force of nature. Perhaps I should be recognizing his power. What was Alice thinking after our call? What crossed her mind when I got home? What about those moments we spent together? Was she counting down the time until Thursday afternoon when she'd be home alone again, waiting for his call? Was she trying to convince herself that moments with me could be as good as what he promised? Was she pushing thoughts of him away? Or was she imagining he was the one with her? And what about the second call? Did her heart skip a beat when the phone rang? Did she hope he wouldn't call, yet long for it? I could picture her surprise at the first ring, her quick breath, her hesitant steps towards the phone, her hand hovering above it, quickly grabbing it before voicemail kicked in, and almost breathless. Hello? Hello, dear Alice, I knew you would answer. Was she scared to answer? Something shifted in her before the call ended, perhaps before it began. It must have been sometime after that when she seemed distant from me, after her late nights at work. Maybe one day I'd hear that call too. I received a call, but it wasn't Richard this time. It was my private investigator. He wanted to meet, but didn't have good news. I realized my thoughts were divided. I felt like a failure. Alice was gone. But she would come back if I could speak to her alone. She had to. I focused on whatever I heard last, and at that moment Mickey was speaking. It was time to make a plan. He suggested we meet at the parking lot of the Liberace Museum. Is that a good spot? I asked. It was convenient. So that's where we arranged to meet. Why can't we just talk on the phone, Mickey? He could be listening. Listening? He has plenty of money and is using people to keep you apart. It makes sense to be careful in my line of work. I had to think about that. Anyway, Henry, getting to Moriarty's place isn't going to happen unless you're up for doing some very risky things with very dangerous people for a lot of money. And you still might not succeed, or you might even end up in trouble. Yeah. So if you want someone to help find Alice, I suggest you call the police. For an adult who ran away? Yes, because nobody has really heard from her, and if you say he has taken her, they might feel they need to check on her. And I doubt he will give them a hard time if he can avoid it. Probably not. Well, I don't know, but it can't hurt. I almost laughed for the first time since Alice left. Who should I contact? I have a friend. He'll want a photo. Other than that, I can keep watch if you want, but it will cost some money. I can keep looking for more places, and I'll let you know if I see them out and about. When I got home, I found Richard had called me back. Yes, Henry, I enjoyed spending time with little Alice. She seemed to enjoy her time with me, too. Isn't it always like that? And yes, her being a bit tough made it all the better, but she won't be tough again. No, she's completely changed. You wouldn't believe how different she is. I plan to keep enjoying our time together. Goodbye. That night I dreamed of Alice. She was lying on the bed, her pale skin marked with bright colors, moving restlessly, her eyes almost closed, her mouth slightly open. I felt so overwhelmed, but I couldn't reach her. I was on the floor and couldn't crawl towards her. I could see her, but in the dream I felt blind. I could hear her soft sounds while I tried to crawl closer, but I couldn't get to her. The days went by and Alice seemed to drift further away. I wondered, how has she changed? What does she look like now? Does she ever think of me? The next week I received another voicemail from Richard. Hello, Henry. So you had to call the police, did you? Do you know how much trouble this could cause? We'll be polite, of course, when the officer visits, but I may have to teach Alice a lesson for this. I called him back immediately. What have you done to her? Have you hurt her? He answered the call. Henry, what makes you think I would harm sweet Alice? He laughed with a warm tone. Let her tell me that herself. Trust me, she's fine, really fine, but she can't talk right now. I suppose I should say she's unavailable. That laugh again. What's wrong? Oh, nothing at all. She's just feeling a bit down for now, getting some discipline. What do you mean by that? Oh, you can read about it. I didn't make it up. There was a study about animals. They kept monkeys in small spaces for a long time to see what happened. It affected them badly, I'm afraid. What have you done to my wife? Nothing, Henry. Really nothing. Don't worry too much. She's not in a real pit. I just kept her from seeing and moving around a bit. What do you mean? Don't stress, Hen. You what? She's doing fine, really. Well, maybe not super happy at this moment. She's feeling pretty low, you know. Probably sad and talking to herself, wishing I would let her out. What are you talking about? But I'll change things soon and make her feel better. A little shift in how she's sitting, some gentle touches. She'll be thankful by the end of the night. You should see her, Henry. She lights up like fireworks, and it makes her easy to handle. Anyway, I hope you have a nice evening. He hung up. I tried calling him many times that night, but he didn't pick up or call me back. Instead, he did whatever he wanted with her while I called in vain. My other calls were to the police officer Mickey mentioned. I called every day and left messages about Richard's claims. The officer was really polite. I thought they must all go through the same training on politeness. While I waited, I bought a phone recorder to keep myself busy. It was a week before the officer came to see me. Standing at my door, what news did he bring? Did some wives want to go back to their husbands? I knew the answer was probably bad. Mr. Jekyll, I looked into your calls. I visited Mr. Moriarty's place and spoke with Richard Moriarty and Alice Jekyll. For now, that's all I can do, and I suggest you drop the issue. What do you mean? I went there as a favor to Mickey Edwards, who is an old friend. But there's no crime here. Your wife is with Mr. Moriarty by her own choice and doesn't want to come back. My investigation is over for now. How is she? What do you mean? How is she doing? She's okay. She was doing okay. Are you sure it's her? Mr. Jekyll, he handed me her photo. It is her. She's a bit thinner than this picture and her hair is shorter, but she looked fine. Did you talk to her alone? No. They were together, but I spoke with her. Everything seemed normal, nothing unusual. What does that mean, unusual? He looked at me with that flat cop expression I always find uncomfortable. Then he sighed. All right, this isn't exactly relevant, but a few years ago a performer living with him came to file a complaint. She said he had hurt her and locked her up. There were some signs of struggle. We checked into it, but then her lawyer had a chat with his. She changed her mind about the charges, saying it was a mix-up. They got along after that. She wouldn't testify against him, and they had a private agreement, but it seemed like he paid her off well. She got married and moved away. That's the end of that story. I didn't know that. It was never in the news. If it weren't for that case, I wouldn't have looked into this, even from Mickey. And it turns out there's nothing wrong here. She didn't have any marks, any injuries? No, none that were easy to see. She wore a long-sleeve shirt, fully buttoned at the wrists and neck. A strange look crossed his face for a moment. Anyway, I'm not going to ask her to show me anything. I can't do that. Even if I found injuries, it wouldn't change anything. Why not? Because they're adults. This is Las Vegas. There's a huge world of different lifestyles here. People choose how they want to live. And that's it? That's it. There was one thing that worried me. He was too controlling. You see that a lot in this line of work, and I've learned to notice it. He held one of her hands and kept his arm around her the whole time. He always jumped in to answer her questions. That's all. It wasn't too strange, and she didn't seem scared. She said she was happy there. Trust me, let it go. If I were you, I'd file for divorce. How long had it been since Alice was out of my life? How many weeks? What do you do when love turns into an obsession? How long since I slept through the night? I kept dreaming about her, waking up repeatedly, thinking I heard her, just chasing shadows. I tried to work, but felt exhausted. I knew it was time to let it go and find myself again. So I asked Mickey to help find the showgirl. But Mickey couldn't locate her. What do you mean you can't find her? You said anyone can be found. I may have stretched the truth a bit. It doesn't mean I won't find her, but it's been tough. I'm still searching for her real name. Her real name? I only know her stage name for now, which is, oh boy, Bambi McPherson. No, yes, Bambi. Yeah, a performer. Who's disappeared? Let me ask you something. Are you sure she's even still alive? What would finding her change? So Richard mistreated another woman? So what? He was wealthy. He might have mistreated many others, but he seemed to take responsibility when called out. What would this woman tell us? He controlled me. Maybe he pushed her too. But she left him and got something in return. Alice could always leave when she was unhappy with how she was treated, unless things had changed. What if his behavior became worse over time? What if mistreating women and letting them go was no longer enough for him? What if Alice was the one he decided to take it too far with? Would anyone ever find out? Would someone someday find parts of a dried-up body in the desert? When Mickey found Bambi, I jumped at the chance. He had her name, an address, and more. She lived in Sacramento, married to a doctor, and her name was now Eleanor Friedman. Mickey even got her home phone number. But when I called and said I needed to talk about Richard, she hung up on me. She claimed she didn't know him. Just like that, the line went dead. I flew to Sacramento. It felt like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I was so tired. I wondered what it would be like to sleep forever without waking up. I thought about giving up. Alice was gone for her own reasons. Still, the guard at the gate called Mrs. Friedman's house. It was the same story. When he gave my name, they said she wasn't home. I asked him to try again and to say it was important and that I was desperate. He was an older, friendly man, and I could probably persuade him, but I just didn't have the energy. I waited for him to get a response while we talked. Then I gave him my cell number and the name of my motel before leaving. I slept away the rest of the morning and deep into the afternoon. In my sleep, I finally found Alice. I was searching for her, and suddenly she was there, standing in front of a familiar building waiting for me. We kissed, and I held her tightly, crying as I did. I didn't want her to vanish. Then, something started knocking, and we both looked to see what it was. That's when I woke up and realized it was the door. Who could it be? Most likely some of Richard's associates here to kick me out. Just a moment. I was wiping my eyes as I approached the door. It was Eleanor Friedman's lawyer. Of course, a polite older gentleman. He told me she could not see me and that I should leave. I wiped my face while he spoke. Wrap it up, sir, so I can go back to sleep and find my wife in my dreams. You're part of a world determined to keep me from her. Then, as he turned to leave, he slipped me something, a note with instructions to walk to the coffee shop at the corner and exit through the back door to a waiting car. A chill ran down my spine. What had Mickey said about being paranoid? In the car was Eleanor Friedman, of course. In hindsight, it all made sense. Here was Eleanor Friedman, a real person I could see. Even sitting in the driver's seat, she appeared tall, and it was easy to imagine her as a performer from a glamorous show. She had elegance, much like someone with an impressive social standing, the kind of woman who leads community boards. She started talking right away. Mr. Jekyll, I need to be quick. I can't share any information about Richard Moriarty due to a legal agreement I have. He also mentioned you were coming, so he's keeping an eye on you. A chill went down my spine. His people are everywhere. I can't be certain. He contacted me directly and reminded me that my past is still part of my life. He suggested it would be unfortunate if it affected my future. She shook her head. He used to charm me, but now he sounds like a character from an old mystery book. Does that mean he will bother you forever? It's not quite that simple. My husband is aware that I was a dancer, and some friends know too. It's not illegal, but I wouldn't want everyone in the medical community or the synagogue to find out. Plus, I just can't be seen talking to you. Is there anything you can share? I feel bad for you. I'm really sorry for your wife. It was time to give up. I really should have. But then Mickey called a couple of days later. Hurry, Henry, they are going to the opening of the Barracuda Casino. Why didn't you warn me earlier? You have about 45 minutes. I arrived just as Richard's limo stopped. I moved through the crowd toward the red carpet. Then I saw them. She was stunning in a sleek black dress, elegant and wearing long gloves with shiny details. She looked thin from afar. She walked up the steps beside Richard, leaning against him, her head almost on his shoulder while he held her waist. Alice! Alice! She looked up and paused. She glanced my way, but I was too far behind. Frustrated, I tried to get closer when casino security surrounded me, led by Richard's polite young men. I'm sorry, but we need to take you with us, sir. Everyone was staring, and I felt wild. I glanced back toward Alice, but by then they were heading into the casino, and I lost sight of her. Alice! They pulled me away and kept me in a small room for about an hour while I protested. Then they released me without any explanations or warnings. That was it. Later, Richard called again, leaving a long voicemail when I got home. Henry, I'm truly impressed by your determination. You followed us all the way to Sacramento. Most people would have given up by now. Just remember, she's only a woman. I could hear the lively casino atmosphere in the background. The call came while I was stuck in that room. Alice is getting ready for me now, making herself look nice as usual. Did you notice how beautiful she is? I've set new standards for her. She has to look lovely every day. Richard's words hit me hard as he talked, his voice calm but filled with something dark. Come on, Henry, it's nothing shocking. After years of marriage, people get comfortable. They stop paying attention. You think she's let herself go, but she's actually changed a lot. His tone was smug, like he'd cracked some secret code. She keeps herself well-groomed and fit. She follows a strict routine to stay in shape, and I make sure of it. She's disciplined and committed. I gritted my teeth, anger simmering beneath the surface. He was playing a game with me, and he knew exactly how to push my buttons. So that's it, Richard? You keep control through fear? He chuckled, clearly enjoying my frustration. Fear? You misunderstand, Henry. It's not fear. It's discipline. If you set expectations and make sure they're followed, things change. People find comfort in it. She knows there are limits, and I make sure she understands it's part of something bigger for the best. You're out of your mind, I snapped. You're admitting you're hurting her. Henry, he said coolly, you're not seeing the full picture. She's not afraid. She's learning to be who she was meant to be. It's part of the plan, the structure, but I guess you wouldn't understand. Where is she? What are you doing to her? I demanded, unable to hold back. He continued, unfazed, as if this were all just a casual conversation. I'm helping her, Henry. That's all. Giving her a new perspective. I clenched the phone, frustration boiling over. You're not helping her, you're manipulating her. Richard's response was chillingly calm, mocking even. Oh, Henry, think what you want. But know this, everything I do is with purpose. There's always a plan. But you know, these are all just dreams. They are what people crave or discover they crave. Everything. And I don't even have to create them. You come up with ideas pretty well. I tried to sound sarcastic. Oh, you poor boy. Don't you know where these ideas come from? Don't you see the fantasy stories and romance novels, and all those educated women who read them and get excited? I find lots online that are much worse than anything I could ever act out. That's not real life. Let me finish. Even if many people online don't seem to know much. Anyway, I get plenty from my own experiences. Let me speak with her. He sounded a bit frustrated again. Let's change the subject. You could use some lessons. Your parents were from England, right? Didn't they admire Queen Elizabeth I? The Virgin Queen? Good Queen Bess? A role model for women in power? That's probably why they named your sister Elizabeth and you Henry. What's your point? Do you know what the real Queen Elizabeth did with people who caused trouble? She had them punished in awful ways. She had them tortured, hurt in many terrible ways, and imprisoned. Have you heard of any of that? Enough. And then she had them executed. Stop it! She had them hanged and then treated very harshly. Do you know what that means? First, they would be hanged for a while. Then they would take them down and stretch them out. This was all in front of crowds. They would disfigure them to make it more painful and shocking. They would cut and open them in front of everyone. You would hope to be mostly gone by then because they would burn your insides in front of you. Finally, they would cut out your heart and show it to the crowd. Stop talking. But it didn't end there. Their bodies were cut up, their heads were displayed to everyone, and their parts were placed where people could see them. That's what Queen Elizabeth did. That's ridiculous! It's true, Henry. Now he was raising his voice, but then took a breath. One thing you should know about me is that I tell the truth. In fact, she wanted to make the suffering even worse, probably because she was fiery. But her advisors convinced her that what they did was enough if done correctly. This time, I couldn't find any words. You think she didn't enjoy watching it? I knew Richard was a man who enjoyed control, weaving himself into people's lives with an unsettling grip. His tone was mocking, recounting old fantasies and the desires he'd seen in others. He leaned heavily into how people's wants drove them to him, as if he merely read their wishes. What are you doing to Alice? I asked, my voice steady but my heart pounding. Oh, nothing so dramatic, he replied smoothly. I'm simply taking her to Cannes, and after that to my private resort for some time away. I trust you won't follow us. I thought that was the last of it, but 10 days later he sent me an email. There were several attachments labeled by name and number. Each was a photo of Alice. I opened the first image, labeled Alice 1 JPG. The pictures showed her with Richard on a beach, laughing, her gaze fixed on him. They were having dinner in a grand hall, surrounded by other people. Her expression was different, distant, as if caught in a world I couldn't reach. In some photos, she looked contemplative, glancing at others around them while Richard talked to her, his control evident even in her expression. As I clicked through the images, I grew more and more uncomfortable. There were moments that felt too personal, as though Richard was trying to show me a version of Alice I didn't recognize. The setting became more secluded, a tropical hut, with Alice seated and looking out with an expression that was hard to read. It felt staged, yet her eyes seemed lost, her presence somehow absent. I paused before opening the last image, dread filling me. Richard had carefully chosen each picture to unsettle me, knowing the effect they would have. For a moment, I considered deleting them all, wondering if there was any purpose in seeing more. The thought crossed my mind, but I clicked on it anyway. It was the worst image I could imagine. Alice was in a hut, bound and exposed. Identical marks were on her skin as before, and I recognized them because I compared. Around her were 6 men, none of them Richard. They were all around her, and one man was caught right in a moment that made me feel sick. There was a small spot on her body, and it was hard to see how she was feeling. Her eyes were wide, her head tilted back, and her lips seemed to move as if she wanted to say something. I couldn't tell what was going on with her. It left me feeling lost. There was something else, too. Someone wrote a message on her skin with a red marker. "Hello, Henry. Wish you were here." After that, it was natural to have the dream again, but it changed. For a few nights, I didn't dream of her at all. Maybe I was starting to move on. I thought, how could it get worse? But it did. The images returned, and I just couldn't shake them off. I kept thinking of Alice with different men, trapped and not herself anymore. Any bright moment would bring those thoughts back. That night, the dream came again, and for nights after. This time, a group of men were there, and I felt unable to reach her. The scenes were overwhelming, but she seemed happy, as if laughing at what was happening. It haunted me. Eventually, I realized I was getting more frustrated. I knew what I wanted to do, and it strangely made me feel alive again. I decided I needed to confront Richard. I couldn't let this continue. It had to stop. He was taking away my life, making me feel less human. I started thinking of ways to deal with him while in various situations. In my frustration, a plan emerged. First, I needed to escape his watchful eye. Richard always seemed to know my moves. How was he aware of where I was? How did his people always find me? Perhaps he had someone following me, as Mickey suggested. But what if he was working with Mickey? Or maybe he had someone listening in on me. I needed to slip away unnoticed. I was determined but focused. I knew I had to be careful. I hired another investigator to search for any hidden devices. My house, car, phone. I discovered something. There was a small listening device on my car and another on my phone line. That was it. No hidden cameras or microphones, but I was still worried about my cell phone. Those 2 devices were probably enough. They weren't very expensive either. As I talked to the investigator, I had a strange thought about Alice. There were only 2 days before Richard and Alice would return to Las Vegas. I knew I had to act quickly. I walked out my back door, went 3 blocks away, and bought a used car for $1,000 in cash, thanks to the weekly advertiser. I drove it to City Hall, went to the waste department, gave Richard's name, and reported that my trash bin had been damaged. Then, I visited a pawn shop where I bought an old badge from the City Works department. It looked more official than the current ones. 1 step at a time. Stick to the plan. I put on a baseball cap and drove the old car past Richard's house a few times, looking for entry points. I visited a shooting range and practiced with my gun on paper targets for an hour. Each time I hit the target, I imagined it was Richard. So far, so good. Richard, you're in trouble. You'll know it's me before anything happens. I thought it was a shame they didn't have more target options. I drove the used car to Palm Springs and parked it in a lot near a hotel. Within an hour, I bought another inexpensive car. I took that one back to Las Vegas and parked it in a lot not far from my house. I felt pleased with myself during the drive back. Now it was time for a distraction. I called the resort in Palm Springs to make a reservation. Then I called Mickey. Sorry, Mickey. I wanted you to keep an eye on Richard and Alice, but I needed a break. He was understanding. I drove my car, which had the bugs, to Palm Springs. On the highway, I kept imagining Alice. At the hotel, I went to my room and turned on the TV. Then I walked downstairs to a back exit, got the used car, and left. The ride back to Vegas was slow because of a traffic accident. At one point, I thought I might be late, but everything went smoothly. 1 step at a time. Just stay with the plan. It will work. Richard thought he was careful and had good security. I suppose he did. But people aren't always alert. That's why airport security sometimes fails. There was a back entrance to Richard's estate with dumpsters and a gate that the staff left open to come and go easily. I could use that too. I wouldn't have to force my way in. I didn't care much about that, but it increased my chances of success. There might be cameras, but I was willing to take that risk. While the boss is away, I made a plan. If someone saw me, I would show them my badge and say I was an inspector for the trash department. Now I laugh about it. Crazy, Henry. Did you think you would not be recognized? I parked close to the estate, walked toward the dumpster as if I belonged there, and carefully moved along the side of the house. I found a group of bushes away from the sidewalk and sat there to wait until it got dark. I could hear when the two of them arrived because of the noise they made. It went on for about an hour, and after that, many of the staff left. While they went out the back, I slipped in through a side door. I stepped into a closet and waited. Soon, it got quiet. Time to act. I walked down the hall toward Richard's favorite room. I knew this house better than most people and where the staff went when they were not needed. When I entered the den, ready for anything, I found Richard there, all alone. He looked just like usual in his shirt sleeves. When he noticed me, it was too late. He could only sit in his chair and stare at my gun. But he didn't look scared, just focused. I enjoyed those pictures, Richard, but now we will play by my rules. Bring Alice here and no one gets hurt. I just want to talk to her. That wasn't exactly true, but it was enough to get her to come out. We could chat for a bit before I moved on. He kept staring at the gun. You don't want this, Henry. Just leave and I won't say anything. You have 10 seconds. I felt like I was in a movie, but I was ready to pull the trigger if he made a wrong move. It was my only advantage, and really, what did I have to lose? 1. Henry. 2. Okay. 3. Armand will get her. Armand. It will only take a minute, Henry. That's all you have. A young man named Armand then walked into the room. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide with surprise. Armand, go get Miss Alice. Mr. Henry wants to talk to her. Armand quickly backed out and hurried down the hall. Silence filled the room. Finally, Richard said, Do you want to sit down? Just be quiet. We can still talk about this. I fired a shot past his leg, shattering a vase. From down the hall, I heard a voice yell in Spanish, Mr. Richard! It's okay, Armand. Everything is fine. Please hurry with Miss Alice. Richard glanced at the gun again. Are you curious how many more bullets I have? It's a Glock. Yes, I know. His voice was steady. I would guess you have at least 9 left. I didn't respond. Maybe I should have, but things were happening too quickly. There were sounds in the hallway, people hurriedly talking. I heard Armand's voice saying something in broken, urgent English, and Alice's voice asking questions. I turned my head towards the doorway, and Richard tilted his head like a little bird. Just then, Alice and Armand stumbled into the room, Armand tugging her along. They looked like a silly comedy duo rushing to help a friend. It might have been funny if I wasn't so tense, thinking about what I might do next. The gun felt heavy in my hands. I shifted my focus from Richard to Alice and back again. Alice glanced between Richard and me. Henry! Armand seemed too flustered to explain who I was. As I pondered this, the 2 big, polite young men came over and knocked me to the floor. They took the gun from me and held me down. It took a moment to understand what had just happened. While the 2 strong men twisted my arms behind my back, I noticed Alice moving closer to Richard, even as she kept looking at me. She got close enough to touch Richard's arm. When she looked up at him, it became clear to me what I had come to find out. I cursed myself for losing the gun so easily, but it would take a few more minutes for me to understand everything fully. Richard naturally took control. Don't hurt him, but keep the gun away from him. We can't trust him right now. As I was pulled to my feet, I finally got a good look at Alice. We locked eyes, but she couldn't hold my gaze. She kept looking at me and then away. She wore a simple, light dress that showed her shoulders and arms and stopped above her knees. Richard had half told me the truth. She was thinner than I expected from the photos. I had imagined her differently, but she was fit, not at all what I had pictured. There were no bruises to be seen. She looked fine. Alice, meet Henry. Henry, this is Alice. You 2 have met, Richard said, smiling brightly. Had he been worried at all about me? Henry wants to hear from you that you've chosen to be with me. He's been very eager to know, so it can't wait any longer. You need to tell him. Then I noticed something on Alice's wrists, slight reddish marks. It looked as if something had been tied there. It seemed Richard hadn't told the whole truth. He had at least partly told the truth. Alice fidgeted. I thought she might stay silent, but Richard was patient. He smiled at her as if she were something he had created, waiting to show his idea. Finally, she spoke. "Oh, Henry," she began. "What a terrible start. That used to be a playful joke between us. I was her favorite candy bar, the one she savored slowly. How long ago had that been? It wasn't funny now. It showed she didn't know what to say." Another awkward moment came. "Why are you here? I'm not coming back. I'm sorry for hurting you, but it's over. You have to move on, Henry. It's really over." Richard nodded at me. It was my turn to talk. "Why? Why did I leave? Why did you leave? Yes, you said you loved me. And why with him? You didn't like him. How could you go to him? What happened? Tell me how this happened." Alice looked at Richard, then back at me. She hesitated. Finally, she said, "It's too complicated. I can't explain everything. I felt trapped. I wasn't happy. Richard makes me happy." There was nothing to say to that. I didn't make her happy. What could I say? We didn't bring joy to each other. I had felt unfulfilled for years. It seemed that Richard could meet all her needs. He could satisfy everything. How long? How long what? When did it start? After New Year's. He had been honest, hadn't he? I didn't argue with her. It was quiet again, so Richard jumped in. He had a big grin again. "It's like I told you, Henry. I offered what she needed, and she chose me. Now she's with me. Tell him, Alice." Alice looked down. She hesitated again. She really didn't want to say anything else to me. "Richard is right, Henry. He has so much energy. He takes charge, and we make each other happy." "You hurt me." I said it, but I couldn't put any strength behind it because I only half believed it. It was over, beyond over. That last faint hope was gone. Richard's smirk turned into a larger grin. "Actually, Henry still cares about you. He'll hope for the best. You need to make it final, Alice. Look him in the eye and tell him. Show him how proud you are to be with me." Something was shifting. Something was about to happen. Alice turned her head to look at me. She spoke more quietly. "It's true, Henry. I'm with Richard. I'm sorry for you." Richard jumped in as she said she was sorry, not letting her finish. "Let me show you, Henry. Alice, tell him how you feel." She turned quickly toward him. She spoke softly to him, glancing at me 2 or 3 times. "Richard, please, not in front of him." In a way, it could have been almost sweet. She didn't want me to hear what she said. She spoke in a low voice, clearly upset. Richard's control over Alice was chilling, a harsh reminder of the power he held over her. He barely looked at her as he made his demands, his tone cold and unyielding. "Alice, you'll do as I say or you can leave right now," he told her firmly. She looked stunned, as though his words had hit her. "Please, Richard," she replied softly, her voice almost pleading. "You know I'll do anything for you, just not in front of him." But he cut her off, insisting that she follow his command without question. I watched, feeling helpless, as Alice reluctantly gave in. There was an emptiness in her eyes, a resignation that hurt to see. Richard continued to assert his control, directing her in a way that left no room for resistance. I wanted to look away, but I felt frozen, painfully aware of the distance that had grown between Alice and me, the trust that had been broken. The silence in the room was heavy, each moment stretching as Alice followed his orders, her gaze barely meeting mine, as if she was lost in some world beyond my reach. The scene was tense, and the air felt thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Richard's every move seemed calculated, intended to remind me of the control he now had over her and to make sure I knew just how far things had gone. In that silent moment, I felt a storm of emotions, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and helplessness. I couldn't help but wonder who Alice had become under Richard's influence, or if she was still the person I had once known. In the dim room, Richard's control over Alice was palpable, as he directed her actions with a calm, patronizing tone. "Very good, Alice," he said, almost as if he were a teacher pleased with a student. Alice hesitated, appearing torn, but she continued to follow his instructions. Her face showed resignation, her shoulders tense as if weighed down by a burden too heavy to bear. Richard's entire demeanor seemed designed to show me the influence he had over her, making it impossible to ignore. "You see, Henry?" Richard turned toward me with a smirk as though he had something to prove. "This is what true loyalty looks like." As Alice went along with his requests, there was an emptiness in her expression, as if she had shut down to avoid facing the reality of the situation. Richard's mocking tone only deepened my frustration and sorrow, making me feel like a stranger in a life that had once been mine. With each passing moment, I saw more of the extent of Richard's manipulation, his insistence on obedience under the guise of affection. The scene seemed orchestrated entirely for my reaction, intended to make me feel powerless, with every movement meant to hammer home how far things had gone. The men holding me were impassive, as if this were routine, indifferent to the strain of the situation. My own frustration surged, feeling trapped and helpless as Richard continued his display, fully aware of the effect it was having on me. Richard seemed to revel in his control, directing Alice in a manner that was cold and calculated. She followed his commands, her face tense, but she complied without a word as though she had resigned herself to his expectations. He watched her intently, his expression showing a sense of satisfaction, as if this display was meant to prove something to me. "You see, Henry," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "This is loyalty. This is what true commitment looks like." Alice looked exhausted, yet she continued to go along with whatever he demanded. Her eyes had a distant, hollow look, as if she'd shut off a part of herself just to get through it. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anger and helplessness, trapped as I was, forced to witness her submission to Richard's control. My frustration grew as I watched, feeling powerless and painfully aware of the distance that had grown between us. The entire scene seemed orchestrated to make me feel every bit of that powerlessness. Richard's every move was calculated, designed to show me the extent of his influence over her, and to drive home the fact that I could do nothing to stop him. The quiet indifference of the others in the room only deepened the sense of isolation. Richard's display went on as he continued to issue commands, his tone almost taunting. He seemed intent on showing me how much he controlled her, leaving me to grapple with a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, and the deep sense of betrayal that cut to the core. Throughout it all, the room remained eerily calm, everyone else acting as though this were just another day. I was filled with anger, desire, sadness, and confusion, but I couldn't move. My supervisors were all serious. Armand stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Alice with a sort of contempt. Alice was sitting back on her heels, breathing hard. And Richard? He straightened himself up and tucked his shirt in, acting as though he was just getting ready to leave the men's room. "Well, there you have it, Henry." His voice was loud again. "That's how a trained woman shows her loyalty. Quite a display, isn't it?" I tried to respond, but he interrupted me. "There's just one more thing, Henry." I braced myself for something harsh, but instead he said, "I see you're still fond of this girl. I understand why, and I don't want her to get in the way between us. So, to settle things, I'm giving her back to you as a gift. Enjoy her." Alice's mouth fell open. The room fell silent for a moment. "What?" Alice nearly shouted. "What do you mean, Richard? Don't joke like that. It's not funny." She tried to laugh, but it didn't convince anyone. "No joke, Alice. It's time for you to go back to Henry." He was calm and composed. "Richard, no, you can't be serious. It's time, Alice. We had our fun. Richard, no, I've done everything for you. And you've received more than what you expected in return. It was a fair trade. I gave up my entire life for you." She looked around the room, moving her head anxiously. She was wiping tears from her face. "My job, my marriage, Richard. Those were your choices. Time to return to reality, dear." "No!" She lunged at him from her knees, but he pushed her back gently. "Armand, can you get a few people to help Miss Alice?" "Richard!" Her voice was high-pitched and desperate. "Give her some clothes and see that she leaves the grounds with Mr. Henry." Out of nowhere, several men and women came in to assist Alice. They grabbed her arms on both sides as she struggled. She was crying and shouting, "Richard, no!" over and over, completely caught off guard. It may seem strange, but I wasn't surprised. I had a feeling from the moment he made her undress that he was ready to be done with her. This was the first time I had anticipated his move. Of course he let her go. He had gotten what he wanted, and there were many others waiting to take her place. She had been blindsided because, in addition to her mistakes, she had acted foolishly. As they started to take her away, he told everyone, "This is inappropriate behavior. From now on, Miss Alice is not welcome here." "Richard," I called out to him. "Yes. There's just one other thing. I don't want her anymore. I won't take her back. Take her back? Honestly, I came here hoping to confront her, maybe even force her to see me harm him. And now I felt upset that I hadn't done anything." Richard gave a big, friendly smile. "And after I worked so hard to help her, well, that's up to you." He turned toward the hallway. You could still hear Alice crying and struggling. "Armand, give Miss Alice some money and take her to a hotel. She won't be leaving with Mr. Henry." He glanced at the bigger of the two men holding me. "George, we need to improve our security. And once Mr. Henry is gone, you can return his gun. But remember, Henry, don't come back or I will report you." As they pulled me away, Richard called out one last time, "No hard feelings." I wasn't sure if he was talking about me or himself. "Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name." But what's puzzling you is the nature of my plan. Richard's plan was one you might expect from someone with a grudge, someone who wanted to ruin past friendships and inflict pain on both of them. Why do we want to hurt others? Who knows why we do anything? He had a clever way to do it. He would charm her, destroy their relationship, and hurt them both in the process. Richard executed it all with such skill, enjoying his control over the situation. He was unpleasant, but you had to admire his creativity. It was a rare talent. I was at my lowest point. That was obvious. Nothing mattered to me anymore. I felt a deep emptiness. I thought maybe I should use a different word for nothing, but honestly, nothing else described it the same way. I had failed as a husband, failed in love, and failed at my own expectations. That's the truth. So please allow me this small joke because, as you can see, I had nothing left. There are millions of happy people in the world, maybe billions, just not in my world. I mostly lay around the house, avoided my calls, and didn't eat. What I could do was grieve. I could do that. I could mourn what Alice and I used to have, or what I believed we had before Richard took it all away. Why wouldn't I think it was real? There were no signs until the very end. Even then, it was confusing. I knew almost nothing except that she was with him until the photos came. Richard had bragged, but I hadn't fully believed him. Until I saw the pictures, I hoped she would leave him, come back to me, and we could salvage our marriage. You don't simply walk away after a decade together. I couldn't just give up. Those photos made everything clear. Every day felt the same. I sat in a big chair and listened to the recording of Richard's first call to her. Every time I thought about how Alice had pushed back against him at first, even if it was just a little and for a short time, I felt a sense of hope. I'd think, "Stay strong, Alice." But sadly, she never did. Even so, I was relieved that I hadn't harmed her. He was the real problem, the mastermind behind everything. She was just a player in his game, a tempting one for sure, but definitely not the leader he had made her believe. It would have been too much for her to witness his end, and then mine, and carry that burden forever. I really messed up. Sorry about the joke. I went through the photos, but mostly I replayed in my mind the scene of Alice with Richard. She had become shockingly good at pretending. Yes, my mind was like an old hamster wheel, going round and round, showing me the same moments and sounds of my wife's performance. Like an annoying song stuck in my head, it was relentless. I couldn't escape it, no matter what I tried. I did all the things betrayed husbands usually do. I threw things around the house. I punched the walls. I cried. I took some pills, drank until I felt sick. Even with all that, I couldn't sleep, and I felt too drained to do much more than sit in that chair and think about everything. Sometimes I had to go to work. There were still tasks to handle. At least I hadn't walked away from my job like Alice had. That was frustrating. But I tried to go in mostly at night when it was quieter, letting my office manager manage as best she could. I took long drives in the desert, enjoying the cool night air. And did I mention I got another DVD from Richard? It had the last scene from his home on it, in blurry black and white from a security camera, and he had written, "Enjoy," on the cover. After that, I didn't have to imagine it anymore. That same afternoon, I filed for divorce. I wasn't going to let Alice get an easy, quick divorce without consequences. No way. I wanted it to be for cheating, emotional harm, and leaving. I also started a civil case to get as much of her property as I could. Nevada follows community property rules, but I thought it was worth the effort. The only issue was they couldn't find her to serve the papers right away, but my lawyer assured me there wouldn't be any major problems. I had more than enough evidence. He even managed to get a court order giving me temporary control over the house. I took some steps people usually think about, mainly shutting down our shared accounts and credit cards. I didn't know if I could keep all the money legally, but it didn't matter. I felt better after that. I sold the unwanted items, cleaned up the home, my home. I changed the locks and got rid of nearly all of her things. I tossed out her photos, packed up her clothes, and donated them. I did everything I could to erase her from my life. It felt much better. The bad dreams stopped. I started working again. Time went by. I thought I could never trust another woman, but I did think about dating. Then Alice came back. Alice showed up. Just 3 words, but they meant so much. One moment she wasn't there, and the next moment she was. The doorbell rang. I should have paid attention. Things were finally getting better, and I thought I was moving on with my life. But then there was Alice in the doorway, looking at me and saying nothing. It felt like a nightmare. Not again. Get out of my life. I slammed the door shut. The doorbell rang again, but I didn't answer. I was already feeling panicked. Is this how it would be now? You can't be ready for it. You can't imagine how it will feel when she comes back. She kept ringing the bell for a long time and knocked, calling to me. Please, Henry, please talk to me. Her voice was scratchy, but I could hear her. I stayed away from the door. I walked quietly around the house, trying not to make any noise. Maybe she would leave if she couldn't hear me. I thought of her like a ghost. She couldn't get to me if I didn't let her in, but still there she was. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. Her shirt looked dull, and her hair was messy. She had a bruise on her arm. Alice looked worn out, but she wasn't much different from when I saw her before. Henry, please. I'm so sorry. Please talk to me. Finally, she went quiet. After a while, I looked out and didn't see her anymore, so I thought it was safe to leave. I opened the garage door and backed the car out. It was hot outside. Spring in Las Vegas felt overwhelming, and sitting there in the shade was Alice, staring at nothing. I quickly closed the garage door, watching it lower. Hurry! Hurry! Just as it closed, I saw Alice lift her head and start to stand up, leaning on the wall for support. I rolled down my window and called out, You're not welcome here. If you want to talk, see my lawyer. If you're still here when I get back, I'll call the police. She stood up and said something, maybe, please, and walked a bit closer, but I drove off before she could say more. What should I do? How could I make her go away? What if the police believed her? I felt frustrated and angry. Just leave me alone. I spent the night at a motel. The next morning, I asked my office manager to call security if Alice showed up. Don't you think you should talk to her? She asked. Maybe you should look for a new job, Sherry. She looked taken aback. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. But you don't know everything she did. I can't really explain without it being inappropriate. Sherry was quiet most of the day, canceling my meetings while I sat at my desk and gazed out the window. Around 4:30, she came in and closed the door. Henry, you can fire me if you want, but I've known you a long time. You need to clear things up. Talk it out, then you can both move on. You don't know all the reasons why she acted the way she did, and it's time to stop letting Richard control you. That's all I have to say. What had I done for weeks, even months? I had tried to talk to Alice, but she wouldn't listen while she was with him. When I walked towards Sherry, she flinched as if I might get angry. I leaned down and gave her a light kiss on her head. I know you mean well, but I can't do that anymore. On the drive home, I kept thinking, please don't be there. Please be gone. I can't handle this. Alice was still sitting in that spot of shade. Was she going to stay there forever? It had been an afternoon all night and most of the next day. She could be in really bad shape. When I arrived, she slowly got to her feet, so she was alive. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. I parked and closed the garage door. She didn't ring the bell, but when I looked through a side window, she was leaning against the wall, her face hidden in her hands. She looked sunburned. What should I do now? I filled a large glass with water, walked to the door, opened it, and held out the glass. Here. It took her a long time to reach me, even though she was only a few steps away. She took the water and gulped it down quickly. I took the glass back, and our hands brushed against each other. Stay here. I closed the door, went to the sink, filled the glass again, and returned to her. She paused once for air while drinking. After I took the glass away again and closed the door, I opened it a third time and stood in the doorway. What do you want? She hesitated, trying to find the right words. She made a soft, sad sound but had no tears. Finally, in a small voice, she said, I'm sorry. I held the door and looked past her at some cactus. Please, I'm so sorry. Please help me. Go away. Let me come home. I'm sorry. Alice's voice was barely a whisper as she started, but then fell silent. You can't stay here, I told her firmly. For a moment she said nothing, just stood there, hesitating. I wondered if she'd say anything at all or simply wait for me to give in. I don't have anywhere to go, she finally said. Then find a place, I replied, frustration building. She looked down, her voice trembling. I don't have any money, no job, I don't have you. I don't have anything. She began to sob, her voice catching in her throat. I knew what was really bothering her. She didn't have Richard Moriarty. Then go to Deb's, I suggested, but her tears only came faster and she didn't bother wiping them away as they fell. She won't speak to me, she said, her voice barely audible. Why not? Just because you left me? She shook her head. It's more than that, please, Henry. Listen. When I was with him, he had this idea. He wanted me to involve her. I tried to talk her into it, and I ruined everything. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. What have I done? How could I do it? I'm so sorry, Henry. Please forgive me, please. So after all this, you come back to good old Henry, I said bitterly, hoping maybe I'll just forget everything? But she kept crying, her words broken and shaky. Finally, she looked up, pleading. Henry, I know you hate me. I did awful things to you, but I need help. Just for a little bit. A few nights, that's all. Please, Henry. I'll do anything, just please. I hesitated, anger simmering as I took in her desperation. Why didn't she ask Richard for help? No doubt she'd tried, and I could only imagine how he'd reacted. As I stood there, an idea came to mind, something that felt like justice in a small way. Fine, come in. I have something to show you, I said, leading her into the den. I put a DVD into the player and turned on the screen. Watch this, Alice. She looked uncertain, wiping her eyes, but when she realized what it was, she gasped, covering her mouth. No, not that. Please, turn it off. Why? You were the star, weren't you? I thought you'd want to see it. She shook her head frantically. No, please. Not so fun to watch now, is it? I said, my voice hard. Please, Henry, don't. I felt a surge of anger. And now you want me to be your safety net? After all you did, you have the nerve to ask me for help? She was crying harder now, desperate. Please, just let me stay for a little while. At least you didn't pretend you loved me, I said, the words sharp with bitterness. Without thinking, my anger erupted, and I slapped her across the face. She gasped, stumbling back, her hand over her cheek. As she turned back to me, I saw the red mark left behind, mirroring the hurt she'd caused me in so many ways. Henry glared at Alice, his anger boiling over. You said you'd let me do what I want. Well, this is what I want. He raised his hand and struck her across the face, feeling a rush as she cried out, both pleading and shielding herself from him. Please stop, she begged, trying to protect her face with her arms. He pulled her hand away. You'll get what you deserve, he said, his voice cold. She gasped in fear, but he wouldn't relent. Fueled by anger and frustration, he was relentless in his words and actions, forcing her to comply. As she tried to comply, trembling, he watched her closely, his anger overtaking all else. But as the moments wore on, Alice's pleas grew weaker, her breaths became strained, and she whispered, I can't breathe. Only then did he pause, noticing she was struggling to catch her breath, and that tears had started to run down her face. In that instant, something within him shifted. He stepped back, taking in what he had done, and a sense of shame began to seep in, clouding the anger that had felt so consuming only a moment before. He watched her struggle to regain her composure, but the weight of his actions began to settle on him. He turned away, leaving the room in silence, his thoughts spinning as he grappled with the anger that had led him to this moment. I realized she'd gone silent. No sounds, no movements. I let go of the belt and looked at her closely. Her arms had dropped, and she didn't react. I lifted one of her arms, and it fell limp. She was barely responsive, just making a soft, faint noise. A disturbing thought crossed my mind, but something else interrupted. My hands were shaking, and sweat covered my forehead. My pulse was racing. Anger and frustration washed over me, but they didn't bring the satisfaction I thought they would. I kept thinking she would try to escape, to fight back. But she hadn't even tried. Why? A strange feeling gnawed at me, and doubt started creeping in. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept circling back. She hadn't run. She hadn't fought. I wanted to ignore it, to hold on to my anger, but something shifted in me. The room felt heavy. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I had to sit down. I couldn't understand this feeling. It was like the fury that had fueled me was gone. I tried to think clearly, to focus on what I was doing, but nothing made sense anymore. My anger dissolved, leaving me with an emptiness I didn't recognize. After a moment, I pulled myself together and went to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. When I came back, I found her lying there, barely moving. She made small, quiet sounds, and I wondered if she was awake. Crouching down, I touched her gently, trying to understand what had happened. She opened her eyes wide and cried out, "No more! Please don't! Please don't!" She moved back until she bumped into the coffee table, then curled up tightly like a small ball. She looked at me in fear, her breaths short and shaky as she begged, "Please don't! Please, please!" She started to cough again. "How much do you have to ask before it matters?" I raised my hand to show I meant no harm and slowly sat down on the carpet. "I promise I won't hurt you again," I said softly. I sat for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I promise." I moved toward her slowly so I wouldn't frighten her. I gently placed my hand on her arm, trying to comfort her while I looked at her injuries. "I promise. It will never happen again. I'm sorry." I couldn't believe how many times I had hurt her. Most of her injuries were just marks, but some had bled, and I feared more would start bleeding. "Stay here, I'll get some bandages." I focused on the task at hand, trying to push away my guilt. I was a monster. One thing at a time, I told myself, but deep down, I knew there was no right path forward. Alice trembled as I helped her lie down on a beach towel. She shivered while I cleaned her wounds and bandaged them. I asked her to turn onto her stomach so I could tend to her back. I spoke softly to calm her down, and she became a bit less nervous, but she was still shaking. She watched me carefully and responded to what I said, though she didn't speak. Her left cheek and lips were swollen. I had done that to her. I went to get an ice pack, which made her shiver more when she pressed it against her face. When I saw Alice, I felt regret rather than excitement. I saw the injuries I had caused. I avoided any contact that could be seen as inappropriate or harmful. Now she needed clothes. That was the next step. I searched the house and found an oversized Las Vegas shirt since there were no other clothes. "I'm sorry, I had to get rid of all your clothes. This will have to do for now," I said. She shifted a bit to help me pull up her underwear, and then she sat up so I could put the shirt on her. I supported her as she sat. "Can you stand?" I asked. She shook her head. She set down the ice pack, and I took both her hands to help her up. She was so unsteady that I had to let her lean against me for support. I could feel her still trembling. "Have you eaten anything?" She shook her head and rested her face on my shoulder. I would have thought she wouldn't want to be near me. I was afraid of letting her get close, afraid of what my feelings might lead me to do. When she finally spoke after the storm, her voice was rough and hard to hear. "Not much. I didn't have any money. I was taking risks at the casinos, but I got caught and then sent away. After that, I went to a soup kitchen." "What happened to the money Richard gave you?" I noticed the scent of her hair but turned my face away, not wanting to be too close. "It's gone. I spent it on motels and food. My car broke down. I used the last of it to try my luck at blackjack." She coughed again and leaned back against me. "I lost everything, just like I lost myself." At that moment, my thoughts wandered far away. She could have accessed our money if she had really tried or had any skills to survive. I imagined her struggling with hunger and thirst near a casino's pool. I remembered that Nevada was a community property state, and I thought about the house and all her belongings that I had thrown away. What had happened to her? She used to be smart and sensible. I finally realized that she needed more help than I could provide. Well, come on. Let's get you something to eat. She leaned on me as we walked to the kitchen. I helped her sit down and poured her some milk. There were fresh grapes available, and she liked grilled cheese sandwiches, so I started making one. She watched me quietly while shaking occasionally, but her coughing seemed to have stopped. What was I thinking? That my anger had faded away. You knew that, didn't you? It was gone, and it didn't matter what she'd done. It wouldn't come back. She wasn't really my Alice anymore. I didn't understand how she had changed. She was just a lost soul, and I wanted to be kind to her. It wasn't about forgiving or forgetting. That would be impossible. What parts could I even forgive? It wasn't Alice who had hurt me. It was Richard. Sherry was right about that. I needed to stop letting him affect me. But Alice had done enough. She left me hanging, and it hurt. It was more than enough for me to feel lost. I never wanted to hurt her, though. Honestly, I couldn't say for sure what I might have done. That last situation took us to a place far from where we used to be. People leave all the time, it happens. There's even an industry that deals with it. You either fight or give that "it's not you, it's me" speech, even if it's not true. Then you hire divorce lawyers. As for the rest, I couldn't erase the memories of the things Richard showed me, though Alice might never have known about them. They were just part of Richard's collection of memories, things he would look back on when he was older and perhaps regretful. Those things were not the worst of her choices. It was her conscious decisions that hurt the most. Finally, things came to a difficult point. It was hard to see her acting in such a way, putting herself down in front of me. I felt helpless, watching her show loyalty to someone else. It was tough. It still feels tough. Was it something I could forgive? What does it even mean to forgive? To move on? To let go of the anger I felt about her past choices? I knew I needed to find peace within myself. If I could achieve that, perhaps I could manage everything else. Others have forgiven even worse things. I once heard a survivor talk about forgiver her captors. I'm not sure I'm as strong as they are. Still, Alice hadn't hurt me in a physical way, so maybe it wouldn't be so hard for me. I wasn't sure, but the anger was fading. You know this already. Then there was another challenge. I needed to find a way to earn her forgiveness for how I had treated her. Her cheek looked painful. I gave her the ice pack again and told her to keep it on until it felt numb. What was going through her mind? Did she wonder if I would help her, or if I might hurt her again? I think she trusted me. We didn't say a word while I cut the sandwich. What do you say to someone after hurting them? You look nice, I blurted out. Oh no, what an awkward thing to say. She tried to smile. I washed my clothes in restrooms and hung them out to dry. You kept things neat, I replied. Why bring that up? I should have stayed quiet. Don't mention the rings. I could see the outline of them through her shirt. Ignore them. She spoke softly. At first I thought he might take me back. Later I felt I needed to find a way to get by, and that meant looking presentable for customers. She sighed. I tried to find a job at a casino, but security caught me. I didn't ask how that went for her. And you thought about giving up? She looked surprised. How did you know? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked, but it just felt right to mention it. She started to breathe quickly and cough again. I'm sorry, Alice. You'll be okay, I promise. I grabbed a dish towel to dab her eyes, but she pulled it away and covered her mouth instead. After the coughing stopped, she said, I didn't mean to try. I was staying at a shelter, but then... She paused, gasping for air. I thought she might not be able to finish. I was hurt by some men, and a lot of my belongings were taken. We were quiet for a while. At that time, I thought about giving up, but I wasn't strong enough. It was always on my mind. I'm really sorry, Alice. I shouldn't have brought it up. That's all behind you now. Things will get better. You'll see. Maybe if I said it enough, she would start to believe me. She was surprisingly open about everything. I thought she would share any story I asked about. I didn't ask if her choice to sell herself had led to her being hurt, or how many men had taken advantage of her. She was beautiful enough to be a successful escort, but she would likely know little about handling the risks. The fact that she had been hurt helped explain her mindset, but it was just one event in a long line of difficulties that had pulled her down. She didn't need to tell me every single detail. There was another problem. She wouldn't eat. You have to eat. You need your strength back. But she said she just couldn't. Finally, we agreed I would eat half of the sandwich, and we would take turns taking bites. She took small bites, which made her cough more. She had a tiny nibble of a grape. That was all before she seemed to drift off again. Come on, let's get you to bed. She started to sway as soon as she stood, so I let her lean on me again and helped her to the bathroom. I found a new toothbrush and some expired cough medicine. Then I took her to the guest bedroom. I noticed some marks on her arm were seeping through her shirt. I realized I would need to take her to a clinic. They would notice those marks. They would understand. There were many things to check. The injuries from before, the chance of infections, her lungs. But the marks were a serious matter. I would have to report myself. That could wait until tomorrow. First, she needed to be strong enough to care for herself. I rebandaged her while she sat on the bed and gave her a clean shirt. In bed with the sheet pulled up, Alice looked even more delicate, and despite her swollen face, she seemed more beautiful than anyone I had ever known. Yes, I knew it was a foolish thought. It wasn't just her body that was struggling, was it? It would be easy to pretend I was a knight rescuing a damsel. Fool! We both needed time to heal. She wasn't even really mine, though I felt responsible for her suffering. She took my hand as I stood. Henry, the reason I didn't say I loved you. I stood above her, holding her hand. It's because I don't have the right to say that, not now. I can't put that on you. I could see she was about to cry again. My Alice? No, I keep reminding myself she wasn't truly mine. I sat back on the edge of the bed. I wanted to wrap her in my arms and carry her away. That fantasy again. Instead, I just held her hand. Don't you think you've suffered enough? That's not it, Henry. Alice, I'm not clueless. You still have some savings. Just a few days ago, you could have accessed our accounts. You own half of the house. You're doing well. She lay there looking up at me, holding my hand and not saying a word. I'm not sure she really believed me at first. She shook her head, but then she squeezed her eyes shut and held my hand tightly. I could tell she finally understood. I think you feel like you belong here, I said. But I don't think that's true. I remembered the times I was harsh with her and heard her pleading. Earlier I believed it, but I was wrong and I'm sorry for hurting you. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. It felt soft against my lips. I knew I wouldn't do that again. It's okay if you don't feel love for me. We'll work this all out. I needed to leave quickly. I didn't want to show weakness in front of her. There was nothing else to do now. I just had to wait. Alice was with me, but I felt alone. I switched through TV channels, picked up some books and magazines, then tossed them aside. I tried surfing the web, poured myself a glass of scotch, and left it untouched. I paced back and forth, thinking about driving through the desert again. But if I did, Alice might need me at night. So I continued pacing, sipping the scotch briefly, then putting it down. I kicked at the books and switched channels again. I took a navel orange from the refrigerator. It was cold and refreshing. I remembered how something similar had reminded me of her before. Why had she stopped wanting me around? I shouldn't think about that. It's part of everything that's happened. I took a quick shower, brushed my teeth, changed into shorts and a t-shirt, and stepped out onto the porch to clear my head. This was where Alice had stood for so long, feeling lonely and sad. I knew she was scared to reach out, but in her mind, I was her last hope. The desert air was filled with a sweet scent of blooming flowers. We were far from the casinos, and the stars twinkled brightly. My thoughts raced. I should call my lawyer before heading to the clinic. That made sense. Or maybe I could call Mickey Edwards. He might help me get out quickly so I could gather some clothes for her, something she could wear when she went to find proper things. How long would she stay with me? After all, it was her house too. Everything felt complicated. It might be better if I found her a small apartment, and I should think about fixing her car. I'm sure she'd need some support. Wait, there was a shooting star. If only I believed in wishes, I'd hope for something good to come from all this. I inhaled the desert air, wanting to keep the memory of it with me. I'd miss it if I ended up in jail. Get a grip, Henry. Focus. I peeked in on Alice. She was sleeping peacefully, but the sheets were all tangled around her. I struggled to sleep for a long time, then I finally drifted into a dream about Alice. It was the same dream as always. I hadn't thought about it for a while. The dream with her on the bed and me on the floor. Then I woke up. Is she home? Of course, she's home. I needed to see if she was really here. I glanced at the clock and noticed something on the floor beside the bed, Alice wrapped in a blanket. She looked lifeless. Alice? What happened? She turned her head slightly and looked at me. I'm sorry, Henry, I couldn't be alone. I didn't mean to wake you. You looked so calm. If only that were true. Did you have a bad dream? No. I'm scared to sleep because I feel uneasy. It happens when I'm awake, too. It's like a wave that hits me suddenly. I don't know how to explain it. Panic attacks. I can't control them. I was scared being alone. I'm really sorry for this. Could I stay in here with you? I promise I won't disturb you. Of course, just come up. She hesitated. No, I don't want to be a bother. It's fine. You'll feel more comfortable up here. She climbed onto the bed, staying on top of the covers. Get under the covers, Alice. You might as well be comfortable. We've shared beds for years. She slid under the covers, facing away from me on the edge of the bed. I watched her for a while. Just as I began to drift off, she jolted like something had startled her. Alice? I reached for her. I'm sorry, Henry, I'm bothering you. Her breathing was heavy and she sounded frightened. Okay, let's try something different. I took a breath. Let's cuddle. Henry, no, I don't want to disturb you. It won't bother me and it will help you. You need to trust me. Right now, I'll think for both of us. I had to believe it would help her, even if I was worried about myself. She didn't say anything. She shifted toward the middle of the bed and inched closer to me. I wrapped my arm around her. She took my hand and brought it to her lips, whispering, Thank you, Henry. You're a lost soul, but I'll help you. I'll look after you tonight and maybe for a few days until you feel better. You were important to me once, and I care for you now. I know we never fully understood each other, but I can see you need someone right now. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. In a little while, her breathing became calm and steady, and I was able to fall asleep. Let's start with the fact that Henry, who might be seen as a hero now, went to sleep next to Alice, without being intimate. Who would have thought that would happen in a story like this? What could come of it? I can tell you that later in the night she woke up twice, frightened from bad dreams. He comforted her, rubbing her hair and speaking softly. Still no intimacy. Personally, I think I would have found it hard not to be tempted. But let's set that thought aside, at least for now. She started coughing again, and it got so bad they had to use the last of the medicine. What about Alice's health issues and Henry's troubling past? If he thought about it clearly, he'd realize he really didn't want to get into trouble, and Alice's health made things even more complicated. He came to see this soon enough. He may or may not become a hero, but there were serious concerns if the authorities got involved. Alice had nothing suitable to wear for the hospital, and he didn't believe she could take care of herself emotionally or physically while he dealt with the situation. He was right, of course. Trust me on that. I'm the writer. Some readers might say things like, well, it's her own fault. That's a serious moral argument, but it wasn't Henry's view, so he had to focus on helping Alice. He lay awake for a long time thinking instead of sleeping. Meanwhile, after he comforted her twice, Alice found herself feeling very close to him. Or maybe she was falling for him again. But don't think you know where this is going. Don't jump ahead. Personally, I wouldn't trust such quick feelings, but they felt real for her. Even she realized there were issues, and she thought to herself, I can never tell Henry that. I might agree with her, and I wouldn't want this to turn into a typical romance story. So let's put that aside for a moment. Things will sort themselves out one way or another. Henry woke up around 8 and called Mickey Edwards. Alice was still asleep, and her breathing was not sounding good. Mickey might still be sleeping too, at least in stories. Private investigators often work at night, but he seemed like the best person to contact first. His wife, Maria, answered on the third ring. This is Henry Jekyll. I'm sorry to call so early, but can I speak with Mickey? It's about my wife, Alice. We need help, quickly. Oh, right. The Richard Moriarty case. Maria's response surprised Henry, but you and I know that spouses often know a lot about each other's work. He's out on another case right now. I can pass a message to him. Please tell him it's important and that she needs medical attention. Wait, stop. Is this an emergency? No. But we need some help. Mickey called back in 5 minutes. Henry, before you say anything, I'm going to ask some questions, and you just give me the main points. Don't mention anything about what you might have done. Got it? Okay. Is Alice hurt badly? No, but wait, I'm not completely sure. I know she needs medical care. What kind of medical care does she need? She came to the house on Thursday. I let her in yesterday. She's been hurt and has trouble breathing. She also has a bad cough. It might be pneumonia. And for some reason you haven't taken her to the hospital yet? Mickey, if we could, we could use a little more privacy. Come on, Henry, be honest with me. If it's serious, hang up and call 911 right now. It's not an emergency. Trust me. Don't mess around with this. Are you sure it's not critical? It's not, but she needs a doctor. You're at home. Yes. And she's okay for now? Yes. I'll call you back. And you better be telling me the truth, or I'll contact the police so fast you won't see it coming. Soon after, a doctor will visit. The service won't be covered by insurance and will be costly. Henry. Okay. How much? Mickey. More than 1,000. Henry. 2, 5, 10, 15. Mickey. Not over 10. Henry. Okay. I'll need to get the money together. Mickey. It's covered. You'll get my bill, and I'll be over later to check on Alice. Alice? You need to wake up. A doctor is coming. He touched her arm. Alice? She looked at him and seemed confused about her surroundings. What? You said a doctor? Oh, my Henry, stop it. Focus, Alice. Control yourself. You need to think clearly. Henry gave Alice one of his long-sleeved shirts to wear instead of her shirt. She used to love wearing them at home. You'll look better. Now you need to eat something. I can't. You have to. Just a little. I brought you some toast and juice. I can't. You have to. Just take a few bites. And I need your clothing sizes. Blouses, pants, undergarments, shoes, and bras. I don't understand. Alice took a small bite of the toast. I'm getting you some basic clothes until we can do proper shopping. I don't understand. But she was waking up. Sherry, it's Henry. I'm sorry to call on a Saturday morning, but we need some help. Did I just hear you say we? Want to explain? It's about Alice and me. So she's at your place? Yes. You finally let her in? Yes, I did, but she's in bad shape and a doctor is coming over. What? Henry, did you do something to her? Please, Sherry, I'm not hurting her. A doctor is coming over and she needs some clothes. What do you mean she needs? I got rid of all her old clothes, and what she had on was torn. If you can, could you get her some basic clothes? Just simple, everyday things. I have her sizes. Henry, what did you do to her? Please, Sherry, you can see her when you get here. Can you help? Yes, but Paul is coming with me. She'd better be okay. Everyone believed Henry had hurt Alice, and it seemed that way. Alice did finish her breakfast and change clothes, but after using the bathroom, she lay back down. She felt like she couldn't breathe well. Henry wanted to stay close in case she needed anything, but he didn't know what to say to her. Alice didn't know what to say to him either. It was awkward. He offered her bacon and eggs with toast, but she said she couldn't eat more, so he brought her some juice and a banana to snack on. Then he waited for the doctor. Sherry and Paul arrived quickly, faster than Henry expected. She brought everything he asked for, including a nightgown, a robe, and some toiletries he hadn't thought of. They walked in without knocking. Sherry put the bags onto the coffee table and looked at Henry. Where is she? She asked, clearly worried. In the bedroom, this way. No, you and Paul stay out here. I will talk to her alone. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. Henry and Paul sat down to wait. What happened? Paul asked. I don't think I can tell you, Henry replied. It's a privacy thing. You know Sherry will ask me later. Then you'll find out then. Sherry came out and quietly closed the bedroom door behind her. She approached Henry and said softly, Give me the belt you used on her. The belt? Yes, the belt. Hand it over. Henry took the belt from a drawer and gave it to her. Sherry examined it closely, noticing some marks on it, then stepped forward and swung it towards Henry. He stepped back, startled. Stay calm, Henry. Breathe deeply. Trust me. Don't let anger take over. Just breathe. He took a moment to steady himself. Henry held still and finally said, I won't let you hit me again, Sherry. Paul stood a little ways between them, unsure of what to think about what had just happened. Sherry held the belt away from her. But it's okay for you to use it on Alice? Is that how it is? Henry stood still. No, it's not okay. Nothing about it was okay. But I did it and I can't take it back. Why shouldn't I just report you? Okay, I get it. Do what you think is best. If you promise to look after her while I'm in custody, that's fine by me. Sherry paused to think. First, you need to tell me your story. What happened? What's your reason? There were reasons, but not excuses. I lost control. It won't happen again. And? That's all? Many people who hurt others say that, but it happens again. What do you want me to say? Didn't she tell you? She says it's all her fault. There was some silence. Yeah, many people in bad situations say that. Are you saying that? No, it wasn't entirely her fault. She had a part in it, but it wasn't her fault. Then tell me. Be clear, from the start. He shared his story. Sherry knew about the leaving and Alice showing up. She definitely knew about the punishment. She had made Alice show her the marks. The rest? Just bits and pieces. She didn't know about Richard throwing Alice out or anything about the pictures. Henry opened his laptop and showed the photos. Most of them didn't surprise her, like the collar and the wine incident. But the last photo? That looks like the start of something disturbing. What's that mean? Henry looked at Paul, who didn't reply but had an interested look. It's a type of adult film, originally from Japan. It involves a woman and many men. She shook her head. No way, that's not real. It is real. Just look at it. She turned to Paul. Is it real? It is. Don't look at me like that. I know about it. Henry had an idea what kind of videos Paul might search for later, and Sherry didn't want to dwell on that. Henry continued. They take turns getting close to her. No. She began to visualize a more disturbing scene. You wanted to know. Sometimes they collect and share what they produce. No! Stop! Sherry covered her mouth and turned away. I'm sorry. I shared too much. I don't know what Alice went through. Richard sent me just one image with the 6 men. Sherry thought, 6? Just 6? Paul made a face as if to say, wow. A few have already finished. I'm not sure how far it went, but it was real. And look at what Richard wrote on her. Henry, wish you were here. It's a bit blurry. It was quiet again. Sherry looked thoughtful. Paul appeared curious. Henry looked sad. Sherry said, that's what made you lose control. No, there's one more part. More? Yes. Henry hesitated. After that, I went to Richard's house. I had something with me, but they caught me. As Richard's guards held me back, he told Alice to remove her clothes, right there in front of me, everyone else, and a camera. And she did. Then he made her do more, all while filming it. I had to watch as he humiliated her and sent me a copy with a mocking note attached. Later, when Alice came to my place asking for help, I lost control. I took out my anger on her, not that it justifies what I did. She was alone and vulnerable, and I realize now how wrong I was. I get it if you think I should be punished for it. After I said this, Sherry quietly put down the belt she had picked up, looking at me with sympathy. She walked over and gave me a comforting hug, like you'd give someone who's grieving. Just then, the doctor and his assistant arrived. They came in a plain van with their clinic's logo on it. It was a quiet entrance, with no flashing lights or noise to draw attention. It wasn't an ambulance, just a clinic vehicle. They brought in some medical equipment and went into Alice's room, shutting the door. The rest of us waited in silence while the assistant returned to the van for more supplies. Finally, Sherry broke the silence. What made you stop? She asked. Stop? I replied, caught off guard. She nodded toward Alice's room. What made you stop hurting her? She blacked out. I went to get some things to keep her from running off, and then I don't know. It was like a weight lifted. I suddenly understood what I was doing, and I couldn't keep going. You hated her. You were furious, hurt. Yeah, until that moment. The anger vanished, but the pain is still there. That's my burden to handle. And you chose to help her after that. I had to. I was responsible. Even with what she did to you? That's her own issue to deal with. I think she's looking for forgiveness. I'm okay with that. But I need to find forgiveness too. From whom? What? She smiled gently. Not from Alice. She thinks you're some kind of hero." Hearing that, Henry managed a faint smile. It was unexpected, a small relief, even if he couldn't quite believe it. They say people often stay close to the ones who hurt them, don't they? So who else needs to forgive you? The state of Nevada? Not them, no, but I still need it. Who from, you ask? God? No, that's easy enough. He looked up and muttered a quick, "Sorry, Lord." He sighed. "No, I need forgiveness from myself, and that's not easy." I remember how powerful I felt. It felt exhilarating. I can't believe I enjoyed it that much. And that's what I have to live with. It's not just what I did, it's that I loved it. That's what's worse. So yes, me, myself, and I. The nurse passed through the room again. When she left, Sherry spoke up. "Henry, we're not going to turn you in, right, Paul?" Paul nodded. "But I don't think Alice should stay here," Sherry continued. "Not so soon after everything that's happened." "Then can she stay with you?" Henry asked. "She doesn't want to be alone. Last night she kept having terrible nightmares. I had to stay with her." Paul raised an eyebrow. "You slept with her?" "No, it wasn't like that. I just stayed close to comfort her, that's all. I'm trying to help her, not take advantage of her." They still looked doubtful. "You're sure you didn't do anything to make her feel like she owed you something?" Sherry asked. "I'm sure," Henry replied. "I was there to help her through the night, that's all. And this morning, I started taking care of what needs to be done." They seemed to accept his answer. Then Sherry brought up something that had been on her mind. "You care for her, don't you?" The nurse came through again. "No, not like that," Henry said quickly. "Not after everything that's happened. I care about her, yes, and I feel responsible. I have to make amends as best I can." He gave a small laugh. "That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. You can believe what you want." The nurse returned, holding a small bottle of pills. The room was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. Sherry thought, "He cares for her, poor guy." Henry thought, "I've really messed things up." Paul, meanwhile, thought, "This whole situation is unbelievable. Is this heading toward romance territory? Two people with hidden feelings, each unsure of the other's heart. It would never work, not realistically, not with all they'd been through. But it almost feels like something out of a movie, a complicated story that might feature Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in their prime. Hanks, the dependable type who tries to make things right, and Ryan, with her charm and intensity. Can you picture her acting in that scene? I could play Richard Moriarty. It might work if they could think of a good ending, maybe on the observation deck of the Empire State Building or something similar. They could even include a twist where Richard the host is taken out, played by someone else. I can see it now. Henry could push Richard over the railing. Since it's New York, no one might notice, or perhaps there's a subway strike and no one sees the confusion. That could work. Then Henry could capture Alice, and after some struggles, they could live happily ever after. But maybe not. I'm just taking a break here because I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Sure, I'm being sarcastic, but it wasn't funny for those involved, except maybe for Paul. Let's continue. Mickey came in looking very tired and worried. Where is she? In the bedroom with the doctor and his assistant. Do you know Sherry and Paul? They're familiar with the situation. This is Mickey Edwards, my investigator. He set up the medical team. Sherry is my office manager, and they might be helping take care of Alice for a few days. How is she? She seems to be a bit better. I think they're just about done. Which they were. The doctor and Mickey knew each other well. They exchanged a brief nod, and then the doctor said, There are 3 main concerns I want to go over. Who needs to leave the room? He looked at Mickey. Is everyone okay? We're all part of this together? It's all right, Bill, said Mickey. Everyone understands. The doctor started. She is a somewhat undernourished woman in her 30s, dehydrated, sunburned, and not feeling well. She has faced some rough experiences lately. Let's start with the more serious issue, he continued. Physically, it's not as bad as it could be. It happened a few days ago. There are some bruises that are healing, and there's a tear that is also on the mend. We found no obvious infections. We took some samples and are running tests, but I don't expect any bad news. I'm giving her these to prevent any problems. He held up a pill bottle. I'm also giving her medicine for anxiety. He glanced around. Where are they? The nurse held up another bottle. About her breathing. It appears she has bronchitis, probably viral, likely worsened by the dusty air we've had lately. It's fairly serious, so we've put her on a cool mist inhaler and Ruth has been helping her learn how to use it. That should help. We've also given her some cough medicine to use as needed. Ruth held up another bottle. We took a sputum sample just to be safe, but it should improve soon. Then we have to address her bruises and wounds. Wounds? Asked Sherry. Yes, cuts. Here's the important part. He turned and looked at Henry, his gaze serious. These injuries are much more recent than the others. When did she first arrive? The nurse was also looking intensely at him. There was a brief pause. I let her in yesterday afternoon. Yesterday. All your troubles seemed so far away. Where did that come from? He glanced over at Mickey. Mickey, the wounds look like they are about a day old. Henry replied. Okay, I see what you're saying. Do you have anything to add? No, I don't. Mickey stayed quiet. You said you let her in. What does that mean? We're not living together. You're separated? I've started the divorce process. But she came here anyway and you let her in. Yes. Why did you do that? I don't know. She said she had nowhere else to go. So, you let her in. She said she had nowhere else to go. She's still my wife. Where does she live? I don't know. How did she get here? I thought she walked. I don't know. She said her car broke down somewhere. Your house is quite far out. How did she make it here after getting those injuries without a car, without proper clothing? I can't answer that. She has clothes on. Mickey asked, What kind of injuries does she have? Marks from slapping and being hit with a belt, on her face and body, on bare skin. Mickey stayed calm as he thought about this. How serious are they? Sherry, who had been standing, moved over to the coffee table and sat down. None are infected. I used medical glue on a few. What's that? Asked Sherry. It's a special glue for wounds. They should heal fine. Sherry and Mickey nodded. What? Mickey asked. Has she said about what happened? The doctor continued to glance at Henry. Not much, except that she believes Mr. Jekyll will protect her. I will, Henry said. Mickey interrupted. Can I see her with you and Ruth and ask her a few questions? Sure. As they left the room, Mickey leaned close to Sherry and whispered, The belt is showing. A couple of minutes later, Mickey opened the door. Sherry? Could you come in here for a moment? Soon the four of them came out together. This is our plan, Mickey said. Alice will stay with Sherry and Paul for the next few days. Okay, Henry replied. Paul stayed quiet, but it was clear he was thinking. I think she might need to see a counselor. She's been through a lot. Night terrors and such. Yes, PTSD. Ruth? The doctor seemed surprised that Henry brought it up. I'll take care of it. I also want to see her again on Monday morning at... Ruth finished. I've checked. We have an appointment at 7:30. 7:30 Monday morning. We'll have the test results and Ruth will set up a meeting with a therapist. Mickey added, Given her experiences, I think we need someone very understanding. Mickey, Ruth exclaimed. You know us better than that. She turned to Henry. Make sure to bring her insurance information. I think her purse and all her details were taken. Well, the doctor replied, that will keep you busy while you're here alone. He wouldn't speak to Henry except through clenched teeth. After the minivan left, Mickey turned to Henry. Wow! How many times did you hit her? Look, if you think you need to call the police, I understand. But, Sherry said quickly, you should get the whole story first. I don't want to lose my trust with Bill, but I want to know more. Henry, you should show him the photos and video. Photos! Video! Sherry's eyes grew wide. He doesn't even know about those? And he's your investigator? There are recordings too. You've heard them. I don't want to see them again, Sherry muttered. But I think I should. Paul looked pleased. Things got worse after Henry showed everything. Oh, sorry. I know many of my readers are guys. They want to know how this viewing went with Paul and Sherry. Well, there are some things I'll keep to myself for later, but yes, they were affected. With Paul, it was what you'd expect. Now that he knew what to expect, he sat ready for the highlights. If you watched him closely, you'd almost think he was getting a bit restless. As for Sherry, it was harder to tell. To me, the author, it seemed like seeing it again bothered her. I could be wrong, but her eyelids got heavy and she flushed. She didn't look away from the screen. She even licked her lips once. and she raised a hand, not to her mouth, but just above her chest, keeping it there until it was over. She stared at the screen for a moment after it all ended. Like I said, I might be reading too much into this. And Mickey? He got really frustrated with Henry for not sharing everything he should have. Then it got worse because Alice didn't want to go with Sherry and Paul. Can I stay here with Henry? Look, we promised the doctor. He won't know. Henry turned to Sherry. What do you think? Well, she said sharply, if you don't mind having her around. Calm down, Sherry. It's like she was starting to like him. But I'm bringing you guys dinner tonight, and I'll come by tomorrow and take her to her appointment. Why not just be her caretaker, Sherry? You know Henry can handle everything. Just remember, Paul said, no funny business. He flashed a big grin. Henry muttered, right, but inside he felt an intense frustration. Where's the belt? Mickey asked. It's under the couch cushion. I'll take care of it, Mickey replied. Sherry glanced toward Alice. Could have used it for some good before throwing it away, she muttered. Sherry clearly held some resentment toward Alice, yet she still spent a lot of time helping out, perhaps with mixed motivations. After all, plenty of people face complicated relationships and unspoken feelings, as Sherry and Paul did. On their way out, Paul revealed his real priorities. Those pictures were intense, and the video, he blurted before they even reached the car. Paul, stop it. Is that all you can think about? Can't you see Henry's hurting? Yeah, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't wonder about what happened. Paul, and I bet you feel the same, don't you? You wouldn't mind seeing her get what's coming to her. Sherry was silent for a moment. Maybe I wouldn't, she admitted. But it's because of what she put Henry through. Henry's too soft, Paul replied. They walked in silence, tension between them. Paul eventually put his hand on Sherry's shoulder, trying to lighten the mood, but it was clear there were deeper issues at play. Back at home, Paul moved closer to Sherry, trying to reconnect, but Sherry brushed him off, feeling unsettled by their earlier conversation. The sap. Why am I even talking about this? Is Sherry really that different from Alice? Sherry doesn't agree with what Alice did, but I think she might have been a little intrigued by the pictures. She's stuck with a difficult husband, but they seem to have a good relationship, and that can make a big difference. As far as we know, she hasn't done anything that could be considered cheating. But then again, Alice hadn't either, at least not before. Is Alice really so different? Or was she just unlucky to be picked by someone like Richard? How can you tell? When everyone left, Henry settled into a big chair, looking away from the bedrooms and staring blankly. It's hard to say how long he sat there until he felt a hand gently touch his shoulder. In her other hand, she held a mist machine. Henry, you look really tired. Come lay down. I need to make us some lunch. I'll stay with you. As they began to move, her knees suddenly buckled. He had to guide her to the kitchen once more, and by the time they arrived, her forehead was sweating and her breathing was heavy. She used the breathing device while he watched with concern. Let me help you back to bed. I'll bring you lunch. Can I stay out here with you? Please? Her eyes begged him. Of course she could. He was a softie, after all, or maybe a kind person. He prepared a can of soup for them. Can I ask you something, Henry? Sure. Why are you being so nice to me? He froze. I know you don't like me, but you've been really nice. How can you do that? The conversation began. Henry wasn't ready to talk, but she had opened the door, and it seemed only fair to respond. I don't dislike you, I promise. I care about you. You said you had nowhere else to go. And after how I treated you, I owe you. That's really what it comes down to. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away. She wasn't trying to manipulate him, she just felt weak. After what I did to you? Alice, that's something I need to move on from. It's in the past. Please don't bring it up again. I just want to focus on getting you healthy. She took a few sips of soup and then set her spoon down. I want to explain how everything happened. I'm worried you might want to get rid of me, but I want to be honest with you. You don't have to. I know I messed up our marriage, so I owe you this. I don't want you to think it was your fault. And here's Alice's story of her mistakes. It's not exactly the same as what she told Henry before, but it fills in the details. Henry understood her well enough and sometimes asked for clarification. To start, I have a big secret. She took a deep breath. All my life, I've been fascinated by the idea of being controlled. I thought about being made to do things against my will. It was a feeling I had for a long time, even before I fully understood romance. I remember when I was 8, my older brother and a friend took me down to the basement to play a game. They wanted me to take off my clothes and lie down on a blanket. They touched me in ways I didn't fully understand. I felt something in my chest that wasn't exactly what I would later know as attraction, but it was intense. Just when things were getting strange, our mother walked in. She comforted me, while my father scolded my brother and called the other boy's parents. She didn't believe for a second that I wasn't forced into it. I never told Henry about this, but I would if he asked about my past. I often wondered if my brother remembered that day. When it comes to my experiences with romance, I have mostly just read. I'd look at stories and pictures. I never really acted on any of it except for being alone. I never guessed. No one ever knew. I read a lot, stories like The Story of O, things like that, like 50 Shades of... Oh, that one was pretty intense, but yes, things like that too. I kept my thoughts to myself. There are many books and movies that explore those themes, but with you, I always felt interested. Our time together was never forced, and I was always committed. I never strayed, except for Richard. I'm really sorry about that. It felt like everything shifted suddenly. Something changed. It was New Year's Eve when Richard showed up with someone else in a way I had never seen before. He brought her out in public. I was shocked. He had her on a leash, guiding her as he acted out fantasies right in front of me. It felt like he was exposing my hidden thoughts to the world. It was infuriating, but I couldn't help feeling a rush of excitement. We ended up having a great night together, and the next day too. Do you remember? Henry nodded. I thought things might calm down, but then he called just a few days later. Henry seemed to acknowledge that. You weren't home. Somehow he managed to steer the conversation to fantasies, particularly one involving me in a vulnerable situation. I didn't even know how it got there. I know, Henry replied. I've heard it mentioned before. What do you mean? He told me about it. The first thing he sent my way? I don't understand. He reached out to me. Tell me how he swayed you. It was part of his plan. I don't get it. It's clear I still have it. If you want, we can look at it later. You can see how good he is. So, yes, I know about it, and I know there was at least one more call. Alice felt her world turn upside down. Everything was suddenly more complicated. Why were Richard and Henry talking about her and sharing her words? What was happening? She lost her focus and realized Henry was talking. Alice, I'm sorry. I know some things because Richard tricked us both. I won't keep them from you. Just trust me when I say I know what happened on that call. So, I'll let you speak. But she couldn't focus. Alice felt dizzy and sick. She pressed her hands against her face and soon had to rest her head on her arms at the table, accidentally knocking over the soup bowl. Some of it spilled and she trembled, scared she would be sick, worried about everything. What if she was the joke everyone was making? What if Henry was in on it with Richard? Henry cleaned up the spilled soup and placed everything in the sink while Alice rested. Let me help you to bed. Come on, up. Please don't make fun of me. He was supporting her as they stood. I'm not. I won't hide anything from you, but there's been no time since you got home for us to talk. Okay, can you walk? Do you think you might be sick? Should we go to the bathroom? No? Then just lie down. I'll get the nebulizer. I'll be right back. Slowly, she began to feel a bit better. Her stomach calmed down. Henry thought she might fall asleep, but she wanted to know the truth and needed to share her own truth. There was another call, Henry. She was frustrated thinking about Richard and everything he could do. He called, and I let him take control. He could read me like a book. I had never cheated before in all our time together. I know I keep saying it, but please trust me. He somehow convinced me. I talked myself into it, telling myself that everyone does it at least once. This would be the only time. You would never find out. We planned to meet. At your office, one of the days you stayed late? No. She laughed bitterly. Richard doesn't go to you. You go to him. I got home late that day, but he didn't come to my office. It was at one of his places not far from here. I left early to get there. It was a small spot in a strip mall, close to a Chinese restaurant where she and Henry had eaten several times. The door had a plain business name that Alice later noticed was usually locked. Inside, however, it was a nice meeting space with thick carpets, lovely furniture, and soft lighting. There was soothing music playing, like that in a spa. I expected something different, maybe like a scene with his assistant, Alice said. Diane, Henry replied. Yes, her, I never met her, but I thought it would be like that. Instead, it was completely different. There were two women there, Juliet and Justine. Those probably aren't their real names, Henry said, thinking. I know, Alice said, looking down with a smile. I've read a lot in my spare time, but those were the names they always used. Juliet and Justine were there to greet her. One was tall and blonde, while the other was shorter with dark hair. They both had strong accents. They took Alice's arms and led her into the main room, which looked like a cozy home theater. Richard was sitting in a large leather chair. He stood up to greet her. She didn't remember everything he said, but she recalled seeing someone with red wine on a silver tray. She was served first, and she didn't see anyone else there. Richard introduced her to Justine and Juliet, commented on her looks, and asked how she felt. He told her that if she wasn't ready for what was coming, she should leave now. Alice felt nervous, but said, I'm ready, Richard. They finished their drinks. Good. Those will be your last words unless I ask you to speak. Nod if you understand. Alice nodded, feeling an exciting thrill. She was starting to feel different, not just nervous or excited, but lighter, almost floating. Her heart raced as the room seemed to dim. She swayed slightly, and Justine, or maybe Juliet, held her steady. Together they guided her to the center of the room, turning her to face Richard. Now keep your face and eyes forward with your hands by your sides, he instructed. Alice followed. No, he chuckled. You don't need to be so formal. Just keep your eyes forward and hands at your sides, that's right. He paused for a moment. Now please take off your shoes. She did so, feeling a bit unsteady. Juliet took the shoes and placed them away. Good. Now your skirt. Alice unfastened her belt and worked to lower her skirt. She struggled to focus without looking down. Did I say you could look down? She heard Richard say. She almost apologized, but instead looked straight ahead and continued to slide her skirt down, feeling a mix of emotions. One of the women took the skirt away. She could sense they had folded something and placed it away, but she couldn't see. Your blouse. That was simpler. Then he gave her a more challenging task. I see you're wearing tights. Please take them off. Girls, find her a stool to sit on while she does this. Once her legs were bare, he had her stand again. No more tights. Next time wear stockings with a garter. Nod if you understand. After she nodded, he said, Now you're dressed just like any woman at the pool, right? She nodded again. The feeling in her chest was steady. She was also aware of a fluttering sensation. She felt faint, as if she wasn't fully there, with only Richard's voice and the hands of the two women grounding her. She didn't share every detail with the readers, not every single one. But Henry understood what was happening. He wondered, why is she being so detailed? Does she really think this will make anything better? But he stayed quiet because he was always polite, except when he wasn't. He hoped this would help her. I listened because it was an interesting story. A woman's struggles can be quite engaging to hear. Would I feel the same if she were my partner? I'd have to think it over, but maybe. At this moment, Henry started to suspect that Richard had added something to Alice's drink. Was it something like MDMA? But why would he do that? She was already vulnerable. By the end of the first phone call, she seemed lost. She surely felt lost by the time she arrived at this place. She wouldn't have turned back then, even if she felt nervous. So why? Maybe it was just to ensure there were no last-minute issues, as Richard liked to plan carefully. Henry thought that perhaps he wanted to give her an extra boost, something to help her go further than just stepping away from her usual routine for a day. Who knows? He was thinking out loud, but he was smart enough to connect the dots. Richard spoke again, and Alice listened. Unhook your bra, but don't take it off. Good. Now close your eyes. She did as he asked. Someone gently pulled her bra straps down until it came off completely. Her heart raced. Another person approached from behind, taller than the others. Justine reached around Alice and touched her softly. Keep your eyes closed. Juliet knelt in front of Alice and carefully pulled her underwear down. Once they were on the floor, Richard instructed her to lift each foot so they could remove it. Now you're completely bare before us for our purposes, he said. "We're just going to focus on one thing," Richard said. Alice was guided by two women whose names she kept forgetting. One of them gently placed a soft cloth over her eyes, tying it at the back, covering her vision completely. Left alone for a moment, Alice swayed slightly, feeling unsteady in the darkness. When the women returned, they each took one of her hands, carefully crossed her wrists behind her back, and tied them with a soft material. "You can open your eyes now if you'd like," Richard said with a chuckle. "Let's begin with something warm and gentle." Alice sat on the edge of her bed, remembering that night. Her head lowered as she stared into her palms, lost in thought about what had happened. She recalled how out of place she felt as everything happening was new to her. The interactions were strange, the closeness unexpected, but the memory had a surreal quality, like a dream. If Alice had shared these details with Henry, he would likely have been convinced that something had altered her sense of reality. As Alice continued recounting to herself, the time seemed to blur, and the world around her felt distant. Alice recalled her unsettling experience, speaking in a quiet voice as she shared it with Henry. She remembered feeling disoriented, held by two women she barely knew, who then led her through unfamiliar, uncomfortable situations that felt designed to test her. When they were done, they helped her sit and catch her breath, her hands still bound until they finally untied her and began dressing her again, leaving her feeling vulnerable and disoriented. Before she left, Richard gave her strict instructions about how he expected her to dress and present herself, details that left her feeling more uneasy. He emphasized that she needed to change aspects of herself to prove she could meet his expectations. This included buying certain clothes and following specific rules. Alice felt her confidence waver as she agreed, not entirely understanding the full weight of what she was agreeing to. Richard's final words stuck with her as he warned her not to lie to him. He implied that she could choose either to meet his expectations or regret missing out on something important. He then left without further explanation, leaving Alice to process what had happened. Justine and Juliet led her to the door, returned her belongings, and watched her leave, offering no comfort. Finishing her story, Alice looked down, as if still lost in the memory. Henry, absorbing what she had said, asked, "Did you see Justine and Juliet often after that?" "They were around a lot," Alice replied. "Richard wasn't always there, so they looked after me. They had instructions." Henry hesitated. "So you just went along with it?" Alice paused, searching for the right words. "Yes. They had a way of making it seem like I should. I never thought of myself as someone who would be okay with that, but somehow I don't know. It was confusing." Henry nodded, trying to understand, but he struggled to find the right response. He simply listened, sensing that the story still weighed heavily on Alice. How did Alice get home that evening? Not well. At one stoplight, the car behind her honked to get her moving. She almost missed another light. She came down from her high and felt flat, even dull, eventually sad. The bright lights of Las Vegas now seemed gray. She didn't want to go into the house but stayed in the car, pretending to listen to the news while really replaying her afternoon. She tried to avoid Henry as much as possible. Was she feeling guilty? Yes. Could he notice anything? And was she longing for what was missing? Yes, again. The house felt empty, and she felt empty. She spent the evening playing on her phone in front of the TV, looking for places that sold nice stockings, one she could visit at lunchtime, and searching for tips on personal grooming. She sat in the shower for a long time with a new razor, pretending she was still deciding what to do next, acting as if she hadn't decided to start a relationship with Richard. Relationship? Was there another word? Ongoing meetings? And she thought about how and when to meet Richard again. "When did you decide to leave me?" This may have been the most important question, right? She might remember the day, maybe even the approximate hour. But was there a turning point? Yes, and we will get to that. But have you ever wondered how someone becomes taken away? Is it sudden? Not really. It's not like losing yourself for one night or having a brief fling. Some people have kept secrets their entire lives. But leaving someone can't be hidden, and it isn't a short-term choice. There are reasons anyone could list or might have faced: hostility, lack of interest, and so on. Maybe they are facing hard times. Maybe it's about money. If you follow the woman's story, you sometimes find what might be called a pattern. Sometimes it's a long one, but often it leads to a simple, though difficult, separation. But Henry and Alice? They seemed to care for each other well enough. Their time together was okay. Not great, but not terrible either. You just heard Alice say she had never cheated before or done anything to make Henry concerned, and since she was being open, we might as well trust her. They should have been fine, except she had a personal weakness, one that is not too rare, and a man who could take advantage of it. I didn't plan it. That first time just happened. Then I knew. It was going to keep happening. Richard swept me off my feet. He swept her off her feet. You might be wondering if she really used such a romantic phrase. Yes, she did. It seemed like she wanted to throw something in Henry's face about the romance of what she did. But she didn't. If you need more proof that she wasn't thinking clearly, that helps make the case. She simply didn't think the words through. Richard swept her off her feet, indeed. But it's true. It felt like a storm had taken hold of her. Richard was quite a character. Successful? More like wealthy. And influential. He had a strong presence, was well-connected, sharp-minded, and extremely creative, with the means to make big things happen. They met for a second time, then a third. Each meeting sparked something new and exciting. Was it only about their connection? Some might think so, but Richard was more complex than that. During their third meeting, Alice found herself in a unique situation, supported against a wall with just her toes touching the floor. As they shared a special moment, Richard rolled out a full-length mirror so she could see herself. You're truly beautiful, and you can shine even brighter. He placed a stunning blue sapphire necklace around her neck and said, Look at yourself. Then he showed her matching earrings. I want you to stay calm while I put these on. You can express yourself. Next, he helped her feel beautiful in a different way, and when he stepped back, he called her beautiful again. You're magnificent, such a lovely person. She admired herself as he explored the way she looked. They looked amazing together, and she felt great about herself too. Later, he told her she could keep the jewels. But where will I hide them? You'll have to find a clever spot. Richard had connections. 2 nights later, he took Alice to a fancy cocktail party when she was meant to be out with her friends. Meanwhile, Henry was at home, puzzled about why he hadn't heard from her. There, Richard introduced her to several important people, including politicians and a famous writer. She wore a beautiful new dress along with the jewelry Richard had given her. Many women complimented her on them. Richard said he wanted to take her to Europe, then to Morocco. Why Morocco? It was something different. Alice soon found herself lying, spending time away from Henry. This change happened quickly. Her main worries were keeping Henry from noticing the hints of her new life and her jewelry. When Richard suddenly asked her to leave everything behind and come with him, she didn't know how to respond. But I can't. Henry. Alice, I can't wait for you to decide. You're halfway here already. You can come with me or stay. It's your choice. I can show you more or you can remain in your ordinary life. But, and don't be so certain he will be devastated. He often complains about you. Complains. You always seem to want more or different things. You're hesitant about trying new experiences. You've changed. There are new ideas he wants to explore. Honestly, he has no idea what he has. When? Almost every time we chat. You talk? More than you think. But I couldn't. Leave him? You just pack up and go. I'll handle him. What about my job? I have more than enough money to cover everything. I will take care of your work situation. As you might expect, she agreed. This is one way things can happen, an old-fashioned way. Relationships often involve more than just love, but there's a lot more to it. You might not do it this way, and neither would I, but Richard? He's had a lot of experience over the years. So when did Alice decide? Did she really make the decision, or was it made for her? How did she respond to Henry's question? She answered, I'm not sure when I decided. So, you just left. No word, no talk, no explanation, not even a note. You left me with nothing. Nietzsche once wrote that if you look into the deep darkness, the darkness looks back at you. That feels true for Henry. He could not look away. The darkness was always there. Maybe it was time to end this conversation. He didn't want to hurt her, but he felt he didn't need to talk any longer. Alice, however, stood up and walked to the soft bench in front of the mirror. From there, she wouldn't have to look right at him. She didn't have an answer, did she? but she knew she needed to say something. I couldn't talk to you. I didn't know how to explain. That's why Richard contacted you, not me. When he put me on the phone, I just repeated what he told me, and then you never even tried to reach me again. What? Richard said you wouldn't, and you didn't. I'm sorry. I know I should think of others. I know I've been selfish, but I felt a little hurt that you didn't call or come see me. I understand. I do. I know I was wrong. I didn't know how to respond if you did call or visit, but you didn't. So I thought maybe Richard was right. You really didn't care anymore. You probably didn't expect that, did you? Henry didn't either. You really think I didn't try to call or visit? You believe that? Of course. We heard you were already seeing someone else. Seeing someone? They saw you at a fancy restaurant with a woman. She was beautiful. Then they mentioned you were with her at one of those big shows. Amazing, isn't it? The things my readers never knew. The lies my characters tell when I'm not around. And you heard all this? From whom? Some friends of Richard's. They knew us from before. You know, Guy Robinson and his wife, the casino manager. It came up during a chat. And that's it? Well, except that you started making it hard for us. Making it hard? Calling the police to question us? Really, Henry? And trying to confront us at the event? When security had to pull you away? Richard said that he couldn't take it anymore and was going to report it. Alice sounded unhappy, which was different from her usual self. And then you went into Richard's house. I don't understand why you did that, especially since you seem to like being single. There was a lot to think about here. Henry actually did call the police, went to the casino opening, and entered Richard's house. So there were bits of truth mixed in with the misunderstandings. Richard had made things messy. Let's cut this short. I'll clear things up and then we can be done. I never went on dates. I haven't been with another woman since I met you. Yes, I called the police and tried to get your attention at the casino, and I did go into Richard's house. The rest is untrue. I tried for days and weeks to reach you, but Richard kept that from happening. He often talked to me, bragging about being with you. No, she didn't believe him at all. My investigator, Mickey Edwards, suggested I call the police because I was worried about you, and that was the only way to have someone check in. He also told me about the casino opening. Do I need to say it again? She didn't believe him. Where do you think I got that recording of your call? What about the video of you and Richard? They came from him just to show off. The tone of the conversation shifted right away. Alice took a deep breath and looked anxious. Before I saw the photos, I hoped that maybe you would leave him and come back to me. But then, it became clear everything was finished. She sighed. I don't get it. Photos? What photos? What are you talking about? Alice's eyes widened as she stared at Henry. Oh no! You really don't know about the photos. They are from Richard's resort. They showed me way too much. They were just more of his bragging. That's when I decided to go into his house. What were the photos of? Henry went through the details while she closed her eyes and shook her head, whispering, No, no, no. He went to the living room to grab the laptop and show her the pictures. Alice sat quietly during the slideshow. She looked down, only raising her eyes occasionally, squeezing them shut again. You can guess what thoughts ran through her mind. Then she shook her head again, saying, No, 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 aloud. Finally, she closed the laptop and began to cry, unable to stop. She covered her mouth to hold back the sound and kept on crying. Henry handed her a box of tissues, but let her express her feelings without interruption. It took some time, but she finally calmed down enough to speak, even if it was still between her tears. Oh, Henry, I'm so sorry. I believed everything. I never understood. How could I? I didn't know you cared. I thought everything was true. How could I be so foolish? I'm a fool. She began to cry again. I'm such a fool. Yes, you are, my dear. Yes, you are. Henry pulled over a chair and sat in front of Alice. He gently held the hand that wasn't wiping her eyes. She didn't look up, but she gripped his hand tightly while she gazed blankly, lost in her thoughts. Once Alice was calmer, Henry wanted to ask her something. Why did you come here, believing what you did? After I had that gun, weren't you scared I would hurt you? Alice looked up, confused. What gun? She sniffed. The one I had at Richard's. A gun? Yes, a pistol, a Glock. I never saw any gun. It was right there, pointed at you. She shook her head again. A gun? All I remember is you and the bodyguards in the doorway. Then they tackled you. She stared at him for a moment, then took a deep breath. Were you really going to hurt us? You? Henry shrugged. Richard? I might have, but it seems I'm not very good at these things. She started coughing and had to use her inhaler to ease it. Maybe it would have been better if you had. Then I wouldn't be causing so many problems. Shh, don't think like that. But aren't you scared of me? She shook her head again. No, I'm not. I'm always afraid, especially after what happened to me. She squeezed his hand. But I feel safe with you. At this, Henry couldn't help but laugh. Then you're really silly. And Alice laughed too, but she held on to his hand and soon their laughter faded. Henry had many questions. He wanted to know everything, but he also hesitated. Alice wanted to share everything, but she struggled. She wished he would take her back, but she felt that hope slipping away. She hadn't fully understood her own situation. Henry had his own mixed feelings. He wanted to be close to her, but also wanted distance. They were both in a difficult place. It seemed knowing the truth was what mattered most to him. Why did you do that in front of me? Why did you choose to? Alice stood up again. She moved to the bed, stood up, paced a bit, then returned to where she started. She sighed deeply. She tried to take his hand again, but he pulled back. I didn't want to do that. I hated it. Well, I did terrible things to you on purpose, but I'm really sorry about it. She was silent. Then she spoke quietly. I understand. I know how awful it was. I want to be honest and explain, not to excuse myself. Her eyes started to fill with tears. You're not going to cry again, are you? No. She dried her eyes with her hands. I'll tell you. Just don't go on about how good-hearted you were. It was hard to believe how supportive he had felt just moments ago. I thought I had to. Before you say anything, I had failed a test and I couldn't afford to fail again, so I did it. Yeah, a test. To stay as Richard's girl. One of many. Yes, I knew that. It was his world, but I was his top girl. That's what he called me. Top girl. His partner. So go on, top girl. I had to face challenges to stay there, do different things. Not all were personal. There was how I ate, how I dressed, how I looked. And the personal things weren't every day. But I couldn't do less than the other girls. Some parts were exciting, but sometimes I had to push myself to get through them. You moved up quickly enough. You say before Richard, your personal life was pretty simple? Ours certainly was. Yes, he once called me his ice cream queen. She smiled at the memory. He liked that I was new to everything. Henry didn't smile. So what was something hard to get through? Give an example. Do I really have to say? Yes, you do. You want to be open and honest? Okay. She sighed. One thing was the golden drink. You drank something awful? Yes, I did. Wow, but you didn't like it? No, but after I was proud I could do it at all, and to keep it down. Okay, that's interesting. What else? Did he hurt you? I saw marks on your belly in a photo? No, that was just a game with a leather lace. It stung and left little marks, and I had to count them. You enjoyed that? I have to tell you, yes, it was exciting. I knew I might get hurt for real someday, and that scared me. But I wanted it to happen. I can't explain it, but it's true. That time, it wasn't real. I once saw him play with another girl. It looked painful, and she seemed to struggle. I knew he would do something to me too, but it never happened except with you. They both paused for a moment, then, did you enjoy it when I hurt you? No. You know it hurt so much, and it scared me. And yet you feel safe with me. He waved his hand in the air. Forget it. But tell me this. Does it make you feel something to remember it? No, I don't know. Maybe a little. Should the conversation continue? Where could they take it? I wanted to learn what test Alice had failed and why, but her last answer made it hard to continue asking questions. I understood why he asked. Her reply? It seemed like she said it without thinking, just as I stepped away from the keyboard for a moment. Sometimes characters do that, and stories take turns I didn't plan. Other writers can relate, so maybe there's more to these characters than we think. In this moment, no one spoke for what felt like a long time. They both looked away. Finally, Henry broke the silence. But you have bad dreams about it, he said. They're not usually about the hitting. Mostly it's about the other thing. I've had many daydreams about it, even more than one at a time. But the real memories don't leave me alone. I can't escape from them in my dreams. I had one where you were chasing me to hurt me. It felt like you, but also not. And I couldn't escape you. But in real life, it's different. Because you're right there when I wake up. And I'm not fully sorry it happened, and... No, I can't. Tell me, he urged gently. Don't make me, she replied. Just say it. Please, no. Tell me what you wanted to say. Okay. It troubles me that it was you. I don't want it to happen again. Ever. Please believe me. But if it's you, it feels different. I know it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. Please let me stop. Okay. Take your time. I won't press you. And he didn't. But remember this. Maybe it's easier for you to think about me being that way again because I won't. I can't guarantee your safety with me, but you are safe from me. The others? Not so much. As I said, Henry is a pretty smart guy, but come on. Ask her about the test she failed. But oh well, it was too late. Sherry showed up with dinner. Sherry hardly talked to Alice except to urge her to eat, and she was good at that. With Henry, she was a different person, talkative and cheerful. They chatted about work, planning for how the assistant manager would take care of things that Monday. They avoided discussing the breakup, the bad experiences, or anything heavy. Would you? This limited their conversation quite a bit. And frankly, as you've likely guessed, she didn't want to talk to Sherry her words, not mine. When Sherry looked from Henry to Alice, her expression would change, freezing for a moment. Alice didn't say much, but she had time to observe. However, it was Sherry who spotted the small red stain on the front of Henry's shirt. Is that where I hit you? Did I hit you that hard? What do you mean you hit him? Alice asked. Oh, never mind, said Henry. You know, it's been such a strange day that I completely forgot about it. Doesn't it hurt? Asked Sherry. What do you mean you hit Henry? It's complicated, Alice. He nodded toward Sherry. Sherry thinks I'm a bad person for hurting you. I can't argue with her. Anyway, she wanted me to understand how it feels, so she hit me once. And no, it didn't hurt. Alice listened silently as Henry spoke. She turned to look at Sherry. You hit Henry? How could you do that? Maybe I hit the wrong person, Sherry replied. Sherry, Henry called out. Everyone was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, and I shouldn't have hit him. I was just angry when I saw what happened to you. I didn't understand how he could do that. I need to go now. I'll take you to the doctor on Monday, but I think I need a break tomorrow. I'm not handling this well. Henry, you should really clean that stain. I can't believe you didn't notice it. Well, Henry laughed a bit to lighten the mood. Next time I'll wear a lighter shirt so it'll show up more. As she reached the door, Henry asked Sherry if she really wanted to drive Alice on Monday. He wondered if it was a good idea. I'll be fine. I really want to help, and I promise not to cause any more trouble. You take care. Before leaving, she gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. She hates me. She's just upset. She'll be okay. No, she hates me, and she likes you. She's my friend. She's right to hate me. I hate myself. I feel like a monster. She clearly wants to be more than friends, but you can't see it. You say you don't hate me, but I know you do. Everyone hates me, and I deserve it. I've pushed everyone away. I wish I could just go far away, but I can't, and I keep bothering you. She stood up, turned away, and wiped her eyes. I said I wouldn't cry, and I won't. Maybe if I leave, she'll find a way to be with Henry. She's not like that, so she wouldn't do anything wrong on purpose. I just wish I could feel differently about her. Alice. Alice. Henry stepped in front of her and pulled her close for a warm hug, his face resting on her head, knowing he was treading on delicate ground. The feelings from last night returned. I don't hate you. I'm angry with you. Is that even a little better? I'll work through it, and the real monster here is Richard. Can we agree on that? He took a deep breath. Also, Whore of Babylon doesn't mean what you think it does. He was surprised she had used such strong language. He continued to hold her, and she rested her head against his chest. The feeling was the same as last night, when he had comforted her and it had made him feel amazed. He knew he would soon lose that feeling. Oh, she lifted her head. I don't want to make your wound worse. It's okay. I'm fine. Can we take a look at it? I'm really okay. We just want to be sure it isn't getting worse. So they went to the bathroom to get the things he had used on Alice the day before. The edges of the wound were red, so he let her examine it. Of course, she had her own reasons for wanting to see. He noticed, but tried to push it aside. He liked her touch on his chest, until he thought about her with others. That thought took away his good feelings. Alice cleaned the wound, which hurt a bit, and put on some ointment and a bandage. She held him a bit longer than needed, trying to be subtle. Once she was done, he thanked her and went to get ready for bed while she prepared to shower. The doctor had said Alice could shower, so she got undressed. But then something troubled her. She realized that this was where she had first prepared herself for Richard. The memory hit her hard, and she felt frozen, staring at the shower. Panic began to rise. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to calm down, then looked at the shower again and started to do what she promised she wouldn't. She began to cry softly so Henry wouldn't hear. She cried for what felt like a long time until Henry knocked on the door. "Alice, are you okay?" "I'll be done soon." Then she quickly got in, washed her body and cleaned her hair, being careful with her face to hide her red eyes, then stepped out. She noticed stubble. She hadn't seen that since Richard had been around. She grabbed a new razor and shaved. Then she stood in front of the mirror wanting to look nice for Henry. But all she saw were cuts and bruises. The bruises on her face looked especially bad, and seeing them made her feel crushed inside. Henry still had questions. Once Alice came out, he had to ask about something that had been bothering him since Sherry had arrived. Why had she felt the need to do that in front of him? What had gone wrong that made her think that was necessary? The question loomed over him. They went to the living room, where she sat on the couch and he took a seat nearby. He asked her directly, and knowing that she had lost him, she found it easier to talk. "It was hard to handle what happened. I couldn't get past it. In the video, you looked okay. What changed? What you saw was just the first group." "The first group?" "They were mostly volunteers from the guests, and they came in groups of 6 at a time. Richard had organized events where participants would get discounts for taking part, and volunteers were usually eager to join. Those who volunteered for the more elaborate shows received a free week, along with prizes and a bonus. Twice a week, there were special events that were popular with the male guests, where some women could observe the first show and decide if they wanted to join in the next one." "How did they fit so many people in that small cabin?" "It wasn't a cabin," Alice explained. "The photo made it look small, but it was actually a stage set below ground level with bleacher seating on all sides. There were screens above so everyone could see clearly, like at big events. A second, larger stage nearby was set up for guests who wanted to watch different kinds of performances." Alice looked away as she continued. "Yes, I was the first night's feature. I'd seen videos of others who didn't seem bothered by it. I don't know how they managed. Richard had me tied down on the platform while the group gathered around. Justine and Juliet stayed nearby, keeping things moving." The memory weighed heavily on her. "Halfway through, I felt queasy, probably from dinner and the wine. I tried to push through, but I ended up getting sick. It was unpleasant, to say the least, and everything stopped after that." A cleanup crew arrived as Richard managed refunds while Justine and Juliet led Alice to a shower room. They joked lightheartedly about the incident, their teasing making her feel even worse. They helped her clean up, washing her thoroughly and brushing her teeth to remove any lingering taste. Once they finished, they dried her hair and replaced the restraints on her wrists with soft cuffs. They then placed a collar around her neck, guiding her down a long stairwell with dim lighting that led to a small, secluded room with a bench inside. Alice's voice trailed off, the weight of her story hanging in the air as Henry listened silently. Alice was led into a small, windowless room where they secured her collar to the wall and bound her feet apart with soft cuffs fastened to bolts in the floor or wall. She wasn't sure which. Justine leaned close, gave her a quick kiss, and said, "We'll check on you later," before closing the door. As the heavy door shut, Alice realized she was locked in a vault. Darkness surrounded her, and there was complete silence. Henry listened quietly. "You must have felt terrified then. Please, Henry, don't." "Sorry. Go on." Alone in the dark, Alice's thoughts spiraled. She wondered if Richard would keep her there indefinitely or if she would be dismissed from the program. Fear overtook her and she panicked, pulling against her restraints and crying out, but no one responded. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and she drifted off. The next day, or what she guessed was the next day, Justine and Juliet returned, releasing her from the bindings and helping her up. They put a kimono on her and escorted her back to the cabin she shared with Richard, glancing at their watches to make sure they arrived right on time. Richard entered with another woman, whom he kissed before sending on her way. Alice noticed it was 8 a.m. by the clock on the wall. Alice wanted to apologize, but Richard silenced her gently. "Lie down and relax," he said. Justine and Juliet began to massage her shoulders, easing her tense muscles as Richard watched quietly beside her. Finally, he reassured her, "I know you won't disappoint me again." When Alice finished recounting the experience, Henry took a moment. "So that's why you felt you couldn't disobey him because of that one event?" "Yes. I didn't want to risk disappointing him again. I had to watch the next event as part of it. 3 women volunteered, and they even drew names to decide." 3? Even after what happened? Alice nodded. "Yes, they volunteered. I suppose they didn't know or they didn't care." "So, you felt you had to prove yourself to him?" "Yes, he wanted me to demonstrate I could handle it." Henry sighed. "And yet you failed me." Alice fell silent, unable to answer. For a long time, the two sat without speaking. Henry wondered if things might have turned out differently if Alice had stood her ground earlier, refusing to do anything that would hurt him. Perhaps it wouldn't have changed anything, or maybe it would have made all the difference. Finally, Alice broke the silence, her voice soft. "I know I let you down, Henry, and in the end it didn't matter. He cast me aside anyway. Just like that, I messed up everything. He was playing with you. He never planned on being with you, you know. I see that now. Do you think you would have said no if you hadn't felt so pressured?" "I really don't know. I'm sorry, probably not." "You couldn't say no to him even if it hurt me, and you can stop saying you're sorry all the time. It doesn't make a difference." "What would happen if I did?" She knew that wasn't a good answer, even as she spoke. "I think he might have kicked you out." "Oh, wait, he did anyway." Alice looked sad, and though she didn't say anything, her eyes were moist. What more was there to say? "What about when you told me how happy you both were together?" "What else could I say? That I didn't enjoy everything? That parts made me uncomfortable? That I was scared of how he might react? Please, Henry, I didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late." "Too late?" "To leave. I thought it was too late to leave. I didn't have anyone or anything outside anymore. So I did what I could to please him." "Forever?" "Yes. Forever turned into looking good, saying the right words, and doing more and more for him. That was my unhappy forever." She paused, shivering and breathing heavily with her eyes closed. Henry let her go through this without stepping in or asking about her medicine. Then he said, "But you liked some of it." "Yes, some of it was nice, but not everything. And yet you could have left at any time. It wasn't like being trapped. What's wrong with you?" "I don't know. I really don't know." They sat quietly for a while without looking at each other until she asked, "Would it be okay?" "Yes?" "Never mind. I already know the answer. If you don't ask, the answer is always no." "I wanted to see if it would be okay to sleep in your bed again. But I get it. I've messed that up too. I know you don't want to be close to me." "Stop guessing what I think. That's so annoying. You always did that when we were together. You don't need to keep doing it now. I'm sorry, we are though, never mind." "What? I didn't mean to say I'm sorry, it just slipped out. You're getting really good at that. So what were you going to say? Just that we're still married, legally." "Okay, you get a point for that. You'd rather win than make peace with me, wouldn't you?" "Well, it doesn't really matter much, not like when Richard was in front of me." She started to say she was sorry but stopped and pulled her hands to her stomach as if she was in pain. "Oh, forget it. Nothing has changed. I know some unpleasant details, which is where the trouble lies, but the main issue hasn't changed. So sure, you can share the bed. Just stay on your side." He said that? Shouldn't he have asked her to leave the house completely? She seemed lost, even as someone who needed help. But that is what he said. What he felt was more complicated, And you can trace the reasoning back to Lincoln, who had faith in the better part of our nature. At least for now, it seems to have won. Well, I asked her to share those things, didn't I? Have I forgiven her for everything? I thought so. I really did think so. But now I'm not so sure. Yet she forgave me, didn't she? I hurt her, and now I'm her so-called hero. I don't want to be her hero. I don't want her to depend on me after what she did. Maybe being a little off helps her. For me? I guess I can manage her being close. Being near me seems to help her, and this is only temporary. She'll get help and find a way to be okay, or good enough to move on. She'll meet a nice guy who can support her, and she'll be happy. I can deal with this for a while. Or maybe it's like Shakespeare wrote, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It drops like gentle rain from heaven upon the earth. It is twice blessed. It blesses both the giver and the receiver." So, sue me. I admire Lincoln and I admire Shakespeare. Truth is, both lines failed at that time. Lincoln couldn't stop the Civil War from coming, and Portia couldn't make Shylock show kindness toward Antonio. Regardless, something resembling mercy helped Henry let Alice sleep in his bed, where he could comfort her during her nightmares. I think her panic and nightmares bothered him more than he'd admit. And let's be honest, it's because she was Alice. Do you really think Henry would feel warm and caring if the person having nightmares was someone else? Like Ilsa from the SS? Or maybe Joe Stalin? I believe he'd feel differently if he had to comfort a small child. But that isn't the case here. So it's Alice or no one. And Alice isn't nothing to him. Love can change to anger quickly, but people remember that they once loved someone, and they can hold on to those feelings for a long time. That's why we feel sad when love ends. As it was, she took her pills and they carefully settled on opposite sides of the bed. Before falling asleep, Alice had a question. She turned to Henry and asked, "Are you still planning to confront Richard?" It's a nice thought, isn't it? But I believe his safety is better now, especially when it comes to me. Still, whether it works out or not, I would be the main suspect, and I refuse to go to jail for someone like him. Oh. I've considered the possibility that he could easily create a little accident for me just to avoid any trouble. Do you really think so? Just thinking out loud, honestly, I believe he's too full of himself to worry about me. He won and we lost, and I'm sure he's moved on to other things. But there's something else. He has a lot of videos of you. As far as I know, they're still locked away. But if I were ever a threat, well, you might end up all over the internet. Do you think he'd do something like that? He's always 2 steps ahead, so yes, I think it's an option in his mind. Alice actually fell asleep feeling happy. Henry was worried about her, afraid her image could be used to hurt her. Earlier, he had called her love, even in a joking way. He had held her and allowed her to help with his injury, and he let her stay in the bed despite everything. Trying to understand it all, she thought maybe things were changing for the better, and she felt lucky, even if she shouldn't. If only it were enough to keep her from bad dreams. Henry went to sleep with mixed feelings. That marked the end of their second day. Sunday came, and by midday, Alice made a big mistake. As soon as she woke up, Alice got on the laptop, and what she found upset her. Henry was in the kitchen. She stepped to the doorway and lightly knocked on the frame. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" She felt a bit better, at least physically. She didn't get tired as easily. There was still something else weighing on her mind. "I looked it up, Henry. I feel like the woman from the story of Babylon." He put down the glass he was drying and leaned against the counter. "Really? Want to share what you found?" "She is a woman with a cup, filled with the wrong things from her actions. I feel like her. I drank from that cup. It's me." Henry slowly shook his head. "That's not you. The woman from Babylon represents a city or an idea. It's not just about a woman. But it says she was a woman. Are you trying to convince me? Though I don't know why you would. It's not like I think you're perfect, so I need to be convinced otherwise. Or are you trying to convince yourself? Do you really feel like you need more reasons to dislike yourself? Read the whole story again? I know I'm right." "No, you're not. Try this instead. Instead of thinking of that woman, think of the lost wife." She paused to consider it. "But there is no lost wife. It's about a lost son." "Maybe there is. Here, go make your own breakfast." He walked past her and into the back of the house. Lost son. Lost wife. The father offered his son another chance. Is Henry saying I have another chance? She stood in the doorway of Henry's office, hesitating to knock, fearing she would ask the wrong thing. This is where she went wrong. Henry, may I ask you something? What you just mentioned about the prodigal wife. Do you mean that about me? Do you believe it's possible that I could have another chance? I would do anything if you would give it to me. The prodigal wife can change for the better. Henry winced and rubbed his forehead. Yes, it was not just a saying. That's not what I meant. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to mislead you. I meant you don't need to be so hard on yourself. Being prodigal isn't as bad as being something worse. Many people have made mistakes, taken wrong turns and things like that. But I don't see us together again. Those days are in the past. Well, love is never easy. That's a saying too. Sometimes the path is blocked. Sometimes it's just difficult. But that's how it is. If you wanted, you could. You could be close to me. I wouldn't mind. She should have looked into his eyes, but she was lost in her own thoughts and didn't catch his reaction. I'm not going to be close to you like that, so please stop. He sounded calm. Really? Anything at all? I'm not going to behave like someone else you knew, so just stop. We're not getting back together. There was no calmness in that. Listen, Henry, I'm offering my support. For anything you need. Well, no thank you for that. Why not? She shot back at him. Do you think you can't handle it? Then she turned away dismissively. He was frustrated but caught himself before he could react strongly. He pulled her around gently by her arm but quickly let go, realizing how he might be coming across. He frowned, feeling a deep conflict within himself. No, please, I didn't mean it. He took a breath, steadying himself. He could feel the tension, and it weighed heavy in the air. It was Friday, and those difficult memories came back to her. This was what would happen to him during those dark times when he lost control. That same change. He looked into her eyes, his expression void, filled with confusion. They stood close, and the weight of the moment hung between them. She wanted to break away, but found herself locked in place, waiting for what might come next. She felt her heart racing, but she couldn't turn away. It wasn't the same Henry she remembered, but someone lost in his turmoil. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. She was very quiet and still. Then he gently lowered her. It was easy for him, just like when he lifted her. He could do anything, yet he was putting her down. He continued to breathe near her, and she thought she saw parts of Henry in his face again. Maybe he wouldn't hurt her. She hoped. Don't you ever say that again? His voice was loud and sharp, filled with anger. When he lowered her, he did it carefully, almost tenderly. Alice was partly off the ground. Then she stood on her own as his fingers slowly opened one by one until he finally took his hands off her and turned away. He looked down at his hands, still breathing heavily. He seemed more like Henry now. Alice felt frozen, her arms held close to her chest. Ever? He pointed at her like she was a target, then turned to leave. He paused at the door and looked back. Ever? And then he was gone. Alice stepped back to the chair and sat down, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as she shivered. Oh my God, please forgive me. What have I done? He could have really hurt me. What was I thinking? I wasn't thinking at all. I hurt him without even realizing it. I wanted to bring us closer, but I only pushed us apart. And now what has he turned into? A shadow of himself. All because of me. Oh, Henry, I'm so sorry. I know you're in pain and you could hurt me again. Henry, please call. I'm sorry for what I said. I was foolish. Please call me. She called again. On the third try, the call went straight to voicemail. The next few attempts did too. She waited in his office, then went to the bedroom and made the bed, hoping he would come back. She tried the living room. Where should she wait? She sat on the couch for a long time. Finally, she felt she had to eat something. But making cereal took a long time because she kept pausing. Sure, she heard his car, the garage door, or his footsteps. After washing the dishes, she remembered she hadn't taken her pills. She went to the bathroom for them, and while swallowing, she thought she heard the garage door again. She wandered around, tidying the house and then tidying it again. She stood by the front door looking up and down the street and then tried his number again. Please come home, Henry. She put the dishes away. She wondered, Is this what I did to you? I left you all alone? No, that was worse because I was gone. You left because you couldn't stay with me. How could I have acted that way? What was wrong with me? Alice sat on the couch trying to relax, but her mind kept racing. She couldn't stop thinking about Henry. She tried turning on the TV, flipping through channels, catching glimpses of news stories about severe weather and world events, but nothing held her attention. She couldn't settle down enough to read a book or magazine, and she found herself constantly listening for any sound that might signal his return. She glanced out the window now and then, feeling restless and anxious. What is wrong with me? She wondered, unable to shake the feeling that something deep inside her was unsettled. She thought about everything that had happened, feeling as if she were piecing together a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. By the afternoon, Alice opened her laptop to go over things that had happened, hoping to make sense of it all. She started from the beginning, reviewing her interactions with Richard. Listening to their first phone call, she noticed how smooth and confident he'd sounded. Every word was perfectly chosen, and his tone was always calm, in control. She replayed parts of the call, noting how he used compliments sparingly and in just the right way, always knowing exactly what to say to draw her in. Even now, understanding his manipulative charm, she found herself caught up in his voice. Her thoughts drifted, recalling moments when Richard had drawn her in with his charisma. Shaking her head, she forced herself to focus back on the recordings. She didn't want to think about those memories, especially now. She scrolled through old voicemails that Richard had left for Henry, where his tone was completely different, cold and unkind. Alice was struck by how he could change so drastically, going from charming and thoughtful with her to harsh and cruel with Henry. Alice moved on to old photos and messages, her mind filled with memories she didn't want to relive. She took a deep breath, closing the laptop, feeling the weight of her choices and wondering how she had let herself get so drawn into Richard's world. Before everything happened, there was a time when he was preparing me for something different. I wonder if I would have liked it if I hadn't gotten sick. My gut says no, it feels wrong, maybe it could have been different. Things seemed exciting when Richard explained them, but now I'm not sure if he pushed me too far. The hardest thing to face was the video from Richard's place, where I was doing something I regretted in front of Henry. Every time I tried to watch it, I felt sick and had to turn it off. How could I have done that to him? I sat there for a long time, checking my phone and then looking out the door before I finally collapsed on the couch. I typed addictions into my search engine. I found links to ideas about sex addiction and Sex Addicts Anonymous, and even some sites claiming that sex addiction wasn't real. I started reading about it all. It was well past dark when Henry returned. I felt awkward standing by the coffee table until he came in, and then I rushed to him. "Henry! Henry!" I tried to hug him, but he pushed me away. Don't touch me." "I'm sorry, I was so worried." "You didn't need to be," he said, walking past me to his office, and I followed. "I want to be alone," but I needed to talk to him. "Please, Henry, can we have a conversation?" "About what? We've talked about everything. Please. Aren't you scared of me now?" "No." "Yes, you are. You should be. You know how close you came to getting hurt again. But it was my fault. I promise I won't do that again." "It doesn't matter. It's not about blame. You said something hurtful during an argument. I shouldn't react so strongly. You should be aware of that." "Henry, I understand how you feel. I made you feel bad." "Stop right there. You don't get it." "I do. I hurt you and I regret it. I just want to be close to you. You really don't understand anything. Maybe not entirely, but I care about you. I want to make things right between us." "Better? The only way to do that is to leave. I've made a mess of our lives. Please don't push me away." I felt the tears coming again, but I tried to keep calm. "Stop it. You don't understand at all. You think my feelings are just about what you said, but it's so much more than that." I paused, taking a shaky breath. "What's left to say?" "I have feelings for you." "Feelings?" She whispered the word, cautious but hopeful. "I know you love me. I believe it. I don't know why, but you deserve love. You're too caring for it to just be sympathy. Isn't there a way I can help you move past this? Can't we support each other?" "Stop! You don't understand!" There was a flash of anger in his eyes and tone. You don't see the whole picture. I have tried not to care for you. I did in the past, but it changed to resentment. That was easier to handle. Then I felt sorry for you and I thought that was fine. But those feelings returned, and I didn't want that. Then we can... Let me finish. His anger rose, and Alice took a small step back. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. It's frustrating. One part of me still resents you. Alice opened her mouth to speak. Don't say anything. I thought I had moved past this. I really did. But then it comes rushing back. All the things you did haunt me. No matter when, I can't stop remembering them. My Alice, I thought I forgave you. But then it came back. I try to convince myself I have moved on, yet the resentment creeps in again. It's here right now between us. You can almost feel it. I want to lash out, but you act like we can just move forward like nothing happened. How could you be so unkind? You didn't just leave me for him. It was so much more than that. What took over you? He had a hold on you. How could you? You were drawn to him, and it cost me dearly. Now you think we can go back to being close again? Well, we can't. As he spoke, the tension in his face grew, and sweat formed on his brow. Alice remained still, standing close to him. Henry took a deep breath, shutting his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he seemed more himself, less consumed by anger. If we were to be together, I might hurt you. I would hate that. And what if I lost control again? You know how that could turn out. Like a werewolf. Alice felt safe enough to continue. But they hurt the innocent, while I feel responsible. Henry moved closer, and Alice instinctively stepped back. A soft breath escaped her lips. He paused. It's all right. I promise I won't hurt you. Remember that promise? I told you I wouldn't hurt you again. Here, in this place. Never again. I promise. She looked at Henry, who was now more himself, standing tall and protective. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. To keep that promise, I can't be too near you. So, I will stay in the guest room tonight. It's better for both of us. Tomorrow, we'll start looking for a place for you to stay. But that night, Alice's screams woke him. No! Don't! No! He knew what was happening and sleepily staggered to her room. He bumped into walls along the way, muttering to himself. Alice was tossing and turning, her fists clenched. No, no! He got on the bed and touched her arm. Alice, you're having another nightmare. At first she didn't hear him. She was still fighting against her dreams. Finally she rolled over, opened her eyes, and when she saw him, she looked frightened. No! She punched at him weakly. No! Alice, it's me. He held her fists gently. It's okay, just a dream. He hugged her close, letting her bury her face against him, and he stroked her back. It's okay. You're safe. I hit you. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to hurt me. It's fine, really. Which dream was it, the belt? No. She paused, remembering. It was you, but it felt real. You were coming to hurt me. She trembled, shaking more than before. It was different from her other nightmares when she calmed down. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise to keep you safe. You know that. He continued to comfort her, and soon her shivering eased. Maybe we can find a different medicine, and I'll stay with you just in case. He brought her a pill and some water. She cuddled against him, and while she grew calm and eventually fell asleep peacefully, he couldn't. He stared at the alarm clock and kept repeating to himself, this is not good. The morning? Quiet. Henry nearly slept through the alarm until Alice woke him in time to get ready for Sherry. And Sherry. It was just a regular day. She was nice enough. She enjoyed fun activities with her husband, but she wouldn't involve herself with Alice. As they drove to the doctor's, Alice said, Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate you helping me. Sherry remained silent, focusing on the road. After a moment, Alice said, I know you don't like me. Sherry sighed and pulled over. She parked the car. Alice, you don't realize how much you affect Henry or how delicate he is. I do. Maybe. But I've seen him at work staring out the window for hours. I've had to handle everything at the office. He's struggling and I worry about him. I understand, I've noticed. I promise. I won't hurt him again. She meant it, but she felt like she kept saying the wrong things. She could sense that Sherry cared for him too. Just keep this in mind. I liked you two together before, but if you hurt him again, I don't know what I would do. I'd make you pay. I know, Sherry, and you're right. The rest of the appointment went smoothly. Alice was doing well. There were no signs of infection or serious illness. She was healing nicely. Ruth gently mentioned that Alice could resume her normal activities, not wanting to upset her. At home, things were tough. Henry wanted to look for a new place for Alice, but she did not want to leave. She wanted to stay. How do you work that out? Carefully. I know I often say the wrong things, but can I ask this once? Can I stay, just for a little longer until I get things sorted out? He tried to be fair. We need to move on. You know what will happen. He had heard it all before. I apologize for yesterday. I won't do that again. Please, just for a little while. I'm not asking for forever. For what? Let's just finish this. What I said yesterday. I do care about you. I really do. And I believe you care about me, at least a bit. That doesn't help us, does it? I'm changing, Henry, and I'll seek help. I want to handle my issues and be better. Please let me try here with you. I want us to work. Please, let's try. There's no such thing as an addiction like this. It feels that way to me, and there are ways to address it. I don't want to stay in that place anymore. Let me stay with you for a bit. Go work it out with Richard or Justine and Juliet. I'm sure you can find a way. Please, Henry, can we just give it a shot? I don't want Richard or Justine or Juliet. I want us, if we can have it. Can I just stay to see? We could be together or not. If we are, we could be together in a way that feels normal, like two people who care for each other. Henry paused, taking a moment to think. Why respond right away? Sure, that sounds easy. Until some time passes and you start to feel what you're missing or I remember what's happened before. Do you really think this can work? It can't. Just stop. We aren't going to be together. But you called me your wife. Doesn't that mean there's some hope? Just a little? I'm only asking for that hope, Henry. Not a promise. Please just give it some time. A chance for a new start? Let me be me again and help make things right. Alice, no. If you really care about me, let me go. Don't pull me back into that dark place I've been in for months. He was feeling worn down. She was starting to wear him out. But she didn't back down. No, she became desperate, feeling that everything was ending just as she was beginning to understand herself. Her fear took over. Just go ahead. If you need to, do it. I'm ready to accept it if it means I can stay with you. I'll do it. Go ahead. Stop. I won't hurt you. She pushed closer to him. Do it. I deserve it. Just do it. Stop it. Then just end it. She moved toward him again. That was it. He shoved her to the ground. It was so simple. He raised his foot like he might kick her, but stopped and placed it carefully beside her head. He leaned over as if to grab her throat, but paused again. It felt like a strong wind was rushing through the house, loud like an airplane. He said something and reached for her, lifting her like a child. He swung her toward the door. Get out of here! Hit me! End it! Get out! End it! Get out! He pushed her hard, making her stumble. When she saw the bathroom door, she dashed through it, shut it quickly, locked it, and began searching through the drawer for scissors. She found sharp nail scissors. They shimmered, curved, and sharp perfect. Henry was banging on the door. Open it! Open it! She held the scissors like a weapon and pressed them against her wrist. Ah! She hadn't expected it to hurt this much. She found another spot, closer to a vein, opened the scissors, and pressed again. Henry continued banging on the door. Alice, open up now! She cut deeper, and blood began to flow, then spurt. She wanted to continue, but struggled to do it. She took a deep breath to find the courage and tried again. Blood trickled down her arm and dripped to the floor, forming a small puddle. Henry shouted louder and slammed into the door. Open it! Open it! Then he burst inside. She tried to cut again, but Henry rushed in, saw the scissors and blood, and yelled, No! He knocked the scissors away, sending them across the bathroom. For a moment he looked like he would strike her, but instead he fixed his gaze on her wrist. Then he looked at her face, then back at her wrist, and finally at the floor. Don't! He gripped her wrist tightly, but blood still seeped through his fingers, so he used both hands. Alice fought back. Let go of me! Let me go! She hit and kicked, but all he could do was hold her wrist. Calm down! It was only a few seconds before he wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close, so she couldn't hit him anymore. They shouted at each other, and he held her so tightly that she felt dizzy. You can't keep me forever! He was incredibly strong. I will! Please, just stop! He wasn't able to stop the bleeding with just one hand. You can't! Let me go! Please, just let me be, for a little while. Something in her back clicked. She was still trying to fight, but was growing weak. Henry looked from her wrist to her face. Look at me, he shouted. Please, look at me. When she glanced up, he met her gaze, took a deep breath, and spoke firmly. There are rules you need to follow. His voice was intense. It grew silent except for their heavy breathing. What do you mean? She asked softly. Please, I can hardly breathe. He relaxed his grip a bit. To stay here, you must follow some rules. You might not be able to. His voice shifted back to being more like Henry's. I can stay? No. It's a trial. He lowered his voice. We're going to test this. We'll see how it goes. It probably won't work, and then you'll have to leave. What rules? First. He had to think carefully. More blood was seeping from her wrist. Come here. He guided her gently to the linen closet and took a washcloth. He had to let go of her wrist to fold the cloth, and blood dripped down. At last he pressed the cloth to her wrist. She stood completely still. First, you must promise to never try to hurt yourself again. And then I can stay? Do you promise? Will you keep me here? You must promise. I promise. Can I stay? There are more. You must promise to never act like you did with Richard again. I promise. Please believe me. I've changed. I will be a good partner. You are not my partner right now. You are my trial. I get it. Maybe I will be your partner again. Maybe, but you need to be loyal. Completely. I will. I promise. No matter how dull our relationship might feel. What? It wasn't. Oh. I see. She shut her eyes and then opened them with determination. I promise, Henry. Listen, I will be loyal even if we never share that kind of closeness again. He took a moment to breathe and relaxed a bit. He reached his free hand to touch her cheek, leaving a red mark. His tone softened. I wouldn't hold you to that promise. But I mean it. Honestly. So do I. You know Richard might come after you again. He can't have me. He once did. But now I'm aware of his tricks. I'll be careful. And if he ever tries anything, I'll tell you. Good. Now for the next rule. You have to promise to be open and honest with me. I will, Henry. I am. Yes, but you have feelings. You might be hesitant to share them, but you must. You have to be open with me. That's difficult. Then we can't continue. No, that's not what I meant. Sharing is hard for me because I've concealed things my whole life. But I will, if it means I can stay. I don't mean everything. I don't want to restrict you. Everyone needs their private thoughts, but the important things matter. If you see Richard again, or if anything about us isn't working for you, you need to tell me. I promise, Henry. He held her gently now, except for her wrist. She touched his cheek with her good hand. There are more challenges ahead. The next one is harder. You need to love me. Oh, sweetheart, that's easy. I promise. There will be times when you won't feel that way. No, there might be times when I'm upset or tired or we argue. I will still love you, I promise. You can't promise that. When he said this, she understood the difficulty ahead. You loved me, and then you didn't. I became an obstacle. Someone difficult. You left me. You didn't love me then. There was no real answer to that, was there? What could Alice say? That was exactly what had happened. People claim they will love forever, but feelings can fade. It's just words spoken in the moment. Where do those feelings go? Sometimes people try to bring the love back, and sometimes they succeed. They reconnect, or at least come to an understanding about each other. But often they don't. Everyone learns these lessons, and they grow wiser because of them. Henry and Alice knew it too, but she had forgotten in the moment of hope that Henry might let her stay. Now, he reminded her of the truth. People know they can't always promise feelings, they can't always be the love of a lifetime, as they say. But they can choose to stay committed. What Alice truly did was turn away from her commitment. What could she even say to that? I can't promise anything. You can doubt my words. But please try to believe me. I've been thinking a lot about this. I do feel like I let myself get lost. Richard somehow brought that out in me, and I let it push everything else away, even my love for you. It didn't feel right. Sometimes I would wonder about you and how you were doing if you were happy with someone else. That's not real love. I'm really sorry, Henry. And I won't take back saying I'm sorry, because that's what worries me most. He listened closely. Both his hands were now on her wrist, which didn't seem to be bleeding much. I love you now, and I mean it. I'm going to seek help. I learned about steps to take to make things right with those I've hurt, and I owe you so much, no matter what you decide. Please let me stay. Henry listened quietly. He wanted this to end soon because he could see her hands starting to swell and he needed to get her medical help. I believe you. But feelings could fade away. People can make different choices, but no one can control their wants. I don't want a marriage without love. Alice opened her mouth to speak, but he stopped her. Please, let me finish. If you feel that you are falling out of love again, it's important to promise to be open and honest. We need to talk about it and handle it together, okay? I will, and the same goes for you. Please tell me if your feelings change. I promise. Now let's move on to the fifth condition. Counseling. We should go to counseling together. When Alice heard together, she felt a wave of joy. You need to recover from this and come to terms with who you are. I also need to heal and understand myself better. I want to make sure I don't hurt you again. She hesitated but said, You know you'll have to share a lot with the counselor, right? I know. It's worth it to make sure I won't hurt you again. Okay, there's one more thing. What could it be? I want us to have children. Alice was surprised. Children were something she hadn't expected. Children? You never mentioned wanting them. Yes or no? When did you decide this? Yes or no? I've wanted them for a long time but didn't bring it up. I want a complete family, and I think it's the right time to decide before moving forward. If you don't want kids, I understand. You can stay while we figure things out and remain close, but I want a partner who wants children. If I have to look elsewhere, I will. But you're right. I love you and I want you to be my wife. So I want us to have kids. How many do you want? Is it part of my promise? 3. 3? Yes, 3. Could we start with 1 and see how it goes? Henry's face lit up. He smiled and gently touched Alice's cheek before giving her a soft kiss. That seems reasonable. Could we maybe start tonight? Yes, but remember, if we ever break up, I want the children. We're not going to break up. Not again. Just so you know. I think starting a family tonight is a great idea, but first, we need to get your wrist checked. How will we explain it? I'm sure it's a common situation. So they were both a bit foolish, but maybe this would work for them. Some might think Alice escaped without consequence, but she faced her share of struggles. She went through many difficulties, hurt Henry deeply, faced shame, and dealt with the loss of those close to her, all while battling her own challenges. If it weren't for Henry, Alice might have ended up in a very bad place, perhaps struggling on the streets. Some might think that would have been better than how her life turned out. I wouldn't say Henry deserves a medal, but he did become a good person that weekend. Neither Alice nor Henry knew for sure how serious she was about her actions. Did she really want to hurt herself, or was it more a plea for help? I think it was desperation. Whatever the reason, it got their attention. One night, after their kids were asleep, Henry asked her if she really meant to end her life. He held her hand and kissed her wrist, where she had a scar. Alice replied, I'm not sure, honey. I was just really upset. The therapist never used the word crazy, he mentioned. But we both knew what she was hinting at. I was so lucky you were there for me. She didn't agree. She thought I might have been too harsh with you. She never actually said that. But we both understood what she meant. You could have if you wanted to, she added playfully. I think you might still be feeling a bit lost. Your lost lady loves you. Alice gently touched his cheek and gave him a kiss, then slowly moved to see if he was interested in being close again. Now, about Richard. This part is quite sad because nothing ever really happened to him. Sometimes bad people live long, happy lives while good people suffer. That seems to be Richard's future. Maybe someone will deal with him someday, but Henry and Alice aren't the type to seek revenge. They've moved on and haven't seen or heard from him since. He has faded into their past. You can't completely forget him, though. He occasionally appears in the society news at big events, often with a new partner by his side. We can imagine what his life is like. He also makes donations to political campaigns and avoids any major scandals because he's careful. You never know, though. Perhaps karma will catch up with him, but even good people get sick. It wouldn't be surprising if he faced something serious. But there are too many good people who suffer from illnesses like cancer. The thought of him facing real trouble seems like the best hope, maybe running into some bad people. Or we could simply choose to move on, which is what I plan to do. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.